Good evening, everybody.
Something must have caused it, right?
No, they don't work. They don't work? No, they're off. So, welcome to the Wednesday, July 30th, 2014 special meeting of the Planning and Transportation Commission. I'm told that we're not being broadcast live this evening. They are taping for the archive, and our normal microphones don't work, so we're going to all try to speak up and not do much cross-talking other than if we have to. And with that, Secretary Ullner, will you please call the roll?
Commissioner Alchek, Commissioner Gardias,
Present.
Vice Chair Keller,
Present.
Commissioner King,
Present.
Chair Michael,
Here.
Commissioner Rosenblum,
Present.
Commissioner Tanaka, 5 present. And before we continue, for the members of the public who have turned in your cards, if you can please, when you go to speak and your name's called, there's a microphone right here by the public table. That's where you will go ahead and speak to, okay? And then please turn your cards in to me. Thank you.
Okay, with that, we will begin with oral communications, which is the part of the meeting when members of the public may speak to any item not on the agenda, 3 minutes per speaker. Do we have any speakers for oral communications?
Yes, we have one speaker tonight, which is Mark Weiss, and you will have 3 minutes.
Good afternoon. Is this working?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I've been following policy pretty closely for about 5 years. I've spoken to this board, not this configuration of the board, a couple times, and I've written about it. And I wanted to just note Eduardo Martinez as a board member and his passing recently. And I also applied to this board twice. And Mr. Martinez made it a point, I believe he wrote to all the candidates that session, perhaps, I don't think he wrote just to me, but he was thanking us for our interest and for our ideas and offering that we could follow up with him personally. I never got that chance, but what I note is that I find it unfortunately relatively rare that leadership has wanted to reach out to aspiring voices in the community, and I know Mr. Keller I met this way. He said hello to me at a function, and I've met several of the people on this board. But sometimes I think leadership, it has a sort of circle the wagons effect, and they don't necessarily want to incorporate new people in. Has been my observation. So I want to commend Mr. Martinez. I think Gary Fazzino likewise. I remember turning around an event and saying, "Hi, I'm Gary Fazzino," and so I want to just note him very briefly tonight. But in terms of, I don't know if this is considered agendized, but I just wanted to say, some people think it's related to the item 2 tonight, but there's something about people talking about when tables for restaurants are on the sidewalk, whether they follow the permitting process, whether we're enforcing that, is that an important thing to enforce? The 2 different newspapers consider it quite differently, and I think it is kind of important. I don't know if it's strictly within the venue of this topic, that's why I'm mentioning it right now, but I think there's something about the public commons, and I think we have to honor that. I think there's a certain political philosophy that wants to minimize what is public and or privatize, and I find that troubling. So I'm hoping to learn more about this issue tonight, and or if that particular point is not part of this issue, I'll articulate that separately. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your time.
So, thank you, Mr. Weiss. As everyone probably knows, the Brown Act precludes us from commenting on anything not on our agenda. However, I want to go over the line and really re-acknowledge former Chair Martinez, whose leadership and public services was hugely valued and is sorely missed. And if any of us, all of us, can uphold that tradition, we are more than happy to do that. And I'm personally delighted that we have what the Planning Commission is a good turnout this evening, which probably is because we have an action-packed agenda, which And will the record reflect that Commissioners Alcheck and Tanaka are now present? So with that, we'll open the public meeting and we'll move to our public hearing. The study session that had been on the agenda for planned community zoning reform has been deferred or continued to the meeting of August 13th, 2014. So if anyone is here interested in PC zoning reform, we'll see you in August. So with that, let's move to the public hearing on item number 2, which is a review of draft modifications to the Bill 2 line requirements in the Palo Alto Municipal Code, Chapter 18.16. And we'll begin with the staff report. Amy French, would you like to?
Yes. Thank you, Amy French, as noted, reporting to Planning Commission. I wanted to, first of all, say thanks again for entertaining this new and improved and modified attempt at adjusting. In this case, we're calling it the Build To Code, not the Sidewalk Code. I have an overview here that kind of gives the rundown of how we're going tonight with, why we're here. The council directed us to fix the Build To Code. We rejected the sidewalk width ordinance as we had worked on it together with the Planning Commission and ARB, and said, we're going to defer the items such as sidewalk width to the Palo Alto Comprehensive Plan efforts. I'm going to describe to you the origin of the Build To Code, which is El Camino focused. I'm going to just talk about the existing Build To applicability and some issues that we found. Then talk about the changes, including an at places change, which you should have an ordinance that I'll just briefly go over, not a lot of changes. And then there are some context-based changes as well as table changes. And then just talk about the next steps. Okay, so next, yeah, basically we already talked about this at the council in June, about the sidewalk width. Previous to that, we had a focus that was broader than sidewalks, and so we have touched upon Build To. Next slide. The origin of the Build To concept is found in the South El Camino Real Design Guidelines of 2002. Again, the intent of the guidelines was to have diverse uses and pedestrian nodes linked by corridors. The corridors, as you see on this map, were Page Mill to Fernando, Charleston, South, mostly the CS zone. The nodes were considered pedestrian nodes, and many of those are CN or CC2 zoned. And the guidelines actually ask for 75% of the building, of the frontage of the lot to have presence with the front wall of the building. As you know, the code didn't go that far, it just said 50% as for corridors throughout the whole length. Here's a little picture from the guidelines that indicate that our goal was to have a continuous street wall, or urban treatment along there, instead of having the missing teeth concept where you might have more deeper setbacks on some lots and forward on others. Defines the street. Here's an image also from the guidelines that shows this 50% of the front property line length captured in the front wall length placed forward on the lot. So that shows what is it meant by Build To line. It's the setback line currently in the code and having the wall frontage, the length of the wall frontage be at least 50%. So it's kind of an odd concept to describe in words. Pictures make it easier. The next slide has shows you that right now in the code there are two Build To lines. One is the 50% Build To code, and again this only applies to when you're doing new development, and it's at the front property line. It requires the placement of the wall along the setback line, and 33% code is for the on a corner lot, the street side yard. So in our zoning code, the front yard is the narrowest of the two lines, whereas the street side yard is the longest. And it's interesting to note that we have two different setbacks on the street side yard. One is when you're doing a mixed-use project at 5 feet, and the other is when you're doing a 20-foot, is when you're doing a commercial project or non-residential project, and that is required to be a 20-foot setback. Here's just an example of a lot that, you know, is on El Camino, facing El Camino, but it's not facing El Camino. It's got its street side on El Camino because it's the longer of the two parcels. So in this case, it would be a 33% along El Camino and a 50% on this barren, the side street. I'm sorry, the front street, as it were, since it's the narrower of two lots. So this is kind of an awkward part of the existing code. Next slide. The special setbacks have an impact on all of this, right? Because in this, the CN and CS zone includes streets with special setbacks. Middlefield is one of those, with a setback of 25 feet in those zones. And San Antonio is another street that has a 24-foot setback. So what the current code says is we want the building to be 50% of the frontage length of a wall placed 25 feet back on these existing. Without the build to line on those streets, Middlefield and San Antonio, it still has that 25-foot setback. It's just, it's saying, well, we're not going to make you put 50% of that line at that setback. That's if you remove those streets from the code. So I should mention that El Camino does have a special setback of 25 feet north of Embarcadero. And interestingly enough, back in 1973, they had instituted a 10-foot special setback south of Matadero Canal. That was removed in 1982. It does require a variance to violate special setbacks. And they also conflict with the El Camino guidelines, which envisioned closer placement. So now to the changes. So if you go to the next slide, changes to the build-to standard. We're eliminating the build-to standard altogether on the CS and CN parcels for all thoroughfares other than El Camino Real. We are deleting the 33% street side build-to for those corner lots. So now all we're dealing with is a 50% on El Camino. We modify the build-to standards to be more flexible, and it only, again, applies to new development. We add the build-to requirement to the CC zoned properties along El Camino, with the exception of Stanford Shopping Center and Town and Country. Other changes, we allow this variable distribution of the 50% number within that first 10 feet of the property. So it's really not a single line anymore, as envisioned in the El Camino guidelines. It's something that can work its way through that first 10 feet, not as a single line, but it can jog vertically this way, so it can go in and out this way and this way, as long as there's that presence in that first 10 feet. We aren't changing the 12-foot effective sidewalk standard for El Camino. That's been in the code since 2005. We're not modifying the setback or special setback. Then next slide, we have at places. This is following the pre-commission meeting where we had some comments from commissioners. We're adding a footnote 8, which is a reference to the El Camino Real 12-foot sidewalk width to that first column. And so if you have it places your new and improved ordinance, you can see where that is. It's in the column table 3 and table 4. And then the first bullet is blended with the third bullet. And again, this is to express how this 50% presence or massing at the front can be placed within that 0 to 10 foot range from the property line. And then the fourth is that we're, to be very clear, the context-based design criteria we're talking about are the ones that are also in that same chapter 1816 of the code. Next. And These happen to be the changes we're making to the context-based design criteria. Again, when it comes to building facades, the ground floor may be set back farther than the upper floors when a greater first floor setback is established to provide more vibrant retail use. Could be more vibrant any use, but retail is what we say here. Then massing and setbacks, we're adding or replacing the phrase "at the setback line" to this more wiggly thing, which is 0 to 10 feet of the street property line. So again, the context is phrased as land use, adjacent nearby properties, building setbacks, proposed adjacent design, lot size, and similar considerations. So then we have just a footnote change where we captured the very astute comment from a previous planning commission meeting from Commissioner Keller that we should have no parking or loading in the first 10 feet of the lot, which existed in the non-residential development table, and now we're adding it as well to table 4. So basically, here we are. After this meeting, we're envisioning going to the ARB in August and the council in September. And we leave you with our recommendation, which is discuss and read the at places changes and hear from our public. Thank you.
So sometimes we have a round of clarifying questions from the commission before going to the public, but I'm not sure that that would be necessary because I think we got a pretty good explanation from Amy. Thank you for that. Why don't we go directly to the public and Vice Chair Keller will announce the speakers.
Great, thank you. So each of you will have 3 minutes. Please talk into the microphone. And it would be helpful if when we're talking, when we're having the meeting, that the audience try to be quiet because we don't have microphones all being picked up by that camera. And you can imagine how hard it will be to transcribe when they do that, when Robin does that in the next few weeks. So first speaker is Andrew Pierce, to be followed by Simon Sins.
Good evening, members of the commission. My name is Andrew Pierce. I'm an attorney in Palo Alto. I represent a group of 14 property owners along South El Camino, owning more than 14 parcels. I spoke at the June 2nd City Council meeting, along with, I don't know, we probably had about 20 people opposing the proposal to widen the sidewalks, which the council decided in its wisdom to defer to the comprehensive plan. I would not be here tonight to speak about build-to-line reform, except for the fact that the ordinance that's been proposed does seem to have some effect of widening sidewalks on El Camino, which is what I've been hired to look into. I would say initially, we believe the current requirement for an effective 12-foot sidewalk on El Camino that's in the context-based design guidelines is almost certainly not a constitutional taking. I'm going to start with that. But that's old news. That's from 2005. What are we doing today? Our findings appear to be an adoption of the Grand Boulevard scheme, which does involve widening sidewalks considerably, and so the findings don't appear to be related to build the line so much as they do Grand Boulevard, and we oppose that. The development standards that are being adopted add language saying for El Camino that building setbacks shall be based on the context-based design criteria. That's new language, and so that could result in an effective widening of sidewalks and an effective taking. The same thing is true with the new requirement for mixed-use property about parking areas. That's described as a cleanup, but it actually does or will restrict use of the front 10 feet of property in any mixed-use development. That is new. That is not the form of build-a-line. That is new. The design criteria themselves, the context-based design criteria are being changed to add a sentence that says, for El Camino, that says, on El Camino, placement of building frontage shall be based on context, including land use, adjacent and nearby properties, existing building setbacks, etc. What that means in practical terms is no one will know what setback is legal until they come to you or the other commissions. Is it Can they build to the line? Well, maybe, maybe not. Can they set back? Maybe, maybe not. It's context-based. And so we have here the possibility of an effective widening of sidewalks, an effective taking of property, that nobody knows if it's been taken or not. This would be very simple to reform build to line for the entire city without changing El Camino one bit, and that's what my clients are in favor. Many of them are here tonight. And so in sum, we don't think it's necessary to expand authority over private property on El Camino as part of reforming build to line. I have no position on reforming build to line. That's, my clients probably all think different things about that. But we are opposed to anything that will effectively increase sidewalks on El Camino beyond the existing 12 feet, which we also believe is unconstitutional. Yes.
So I just want to point out that this thing doesn't beep anymore. So when the light turns red, you'll have to stop, but I will interrupt you when the light turns red, and we're out to 3 minutes.
All right.
I'm not sure why it beeps at 3 minutes and 30 seconds. But that's what it's doing, so.
I was a chair on your side for about 5 years, so I know that 3 minutes pretty well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Simon Sins, to be followed by Kumaran Santhanam. And I'm sorry if I butchered your name.
Well, you didn't butcher mine. Although it's been butchered often. My name is Simon Sins. Our family has owned property, been in the Palo Alto since the 50s. We own 2 parcels, small parcels on El Camino, in the south part of El Camino, first of all, I'd like to thank Amy French for taking the time to try to explain this to me. And if anything I say tonight is wrong, that's my fault, not hers. Okay, this is very complicated stuff, and but my comments are more general. When I read these things, and I see the 18-foot G, that rings a bell. That's not by coincidence, I think, the same number that was in the the sidewalk widening issue that we talked to the council about. All of this comes from a council meeting in June 2nd, I think, where the council said, well, we don't like the ordinances being presented at that time. Come back and give us something with change of build to line. So I was sort of surprised to see that what happened was the build to line got eliminated for everywhere in Palo Alto that I could tell. I mean, I understand it's in some places it's very different, but not in El Camino. And I still don't really understand what makes El Camino so special that you have this build to line. Modified, granted, but still there. The other thing is, when I look at the build to line description for El Camino, I see this as step 1 toward the Grand Boulevard. I mean, this is how you start, okay? You set things up so that when the Grand Boulevard initiative comes along and as part of the comprehensive plan and is approved, then we end up with the Grand Boulevard. And you heard, or actually you, but the council in June heard a lot of people saying, we don't want it. It's El Camino is not the Champs-Élysées. Lastly, and very quickly, is by making it very difficult for small property owners to develop their own property, you're encouraging people like us who have small properties to sell our properties to larger developers. And I think that's not what people in Palo Alto want. I don't think people want the big development. Take a look at Measure D, for example. So, I'm hoping that that whatever you guys do with this particular line, it will not lead to the Grand Boulevard design. That hopefully this is not step number 1 for that. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Kumaran Santhanam. I'm sorry if I butchered your name. To be followed by Tracy May.
It's okay, I'm used to it. All right. Yeah, so I'm Kumaran Santhanam. I'm actually just a concerned citizen with no vested interest in any of the properties at all. I'm a friend of one of the owners. I went to Stanford. I'm a local Silicon Valley guy, so I come to Palo Alto all the time. So this is really just a layperson's viewpoint. And I really wanted to focus about the 2005 setback that was signed into law that talks about the 12-foot sidewalks. My concern about that is a number of things. One is that the owners were not notified, I guess sufficiently, because many of them only found out about it this year. I think all of them may have only found out about it this year. So they didn't know that there was even a change in the setback from their 8-foot to their 12-foot setback. And that was a bit disturbing, and I wasn't really sure how that would have happened, given that all of the owners' information would be on file and they could have been notified pretty easily. And kind of following on that, this sort of widening of the sidewalks cuts into the buildings and devalues them immediately. Rebuilds, remodels are affected, resale is a problem, because a new owner is going to naturally wonder, well, what's the value of this building now that the square footage has been cut? And I think from an engineer's perspective, it's not really a linear devaluation. If you have a 10,000 square foot building and you lose 1,000 square feet, you can't just say I've lopped off 10% of the value. There may be certain kinds of inventory that can't be stored in that building anymore and result in greater devaluation. The space may become awkward in certain ways, and it produces even more monetary issues. So kind of following on that, given that it's not linear, even if it were linear, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars per property that have been devalued by the 2005 law alone, at least from my perspective. And the owners were not compensated for this. And I think, as Andy pointed out earlier, my view of the not being a lawyer, but my view of the Fifth Amendment is that the government has to pay just compensation for any private property taken for public use, even if it's used in a manner that benefits public interest. So before talking about additional square footage and all these Grand Boulevard initiatives, I really encourage the City Council to look seriously at these issues surrounding the 2005 law, so that those type of things can be resolved first, so that future planning can proceed with some certainty about what can or can't be done, or what issues surround those concepts. So that's all I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Tracy May, to be followed by Peter Eng.
Thanks. I just have a smattering of things to add today, but the first thing I'd like to do is thank Amy French for returning my answers to my questions, or at least trying to answer it. I think this is very complicated. I don't know a lot about this kind of thing, but just to read it and try and figure it out, I think there's a lot of confusion. And I was just thinking that before it goes to like a hearing situation, perhaps it should have gone to a neighborhood, business, property owner kind of thing, and get our questions answered and really get our mind gripped around what these things mean, what they mean for our properties. Most of the people in here, and most of the people on El Camino, if you just do a Google Earth, you'll see that there are small properties, okay? Even if we sold out all the properties on the 2000 block of El Camino Real, you wouldn't have enough to put up in one of your massive, residential places. And I find it's interesting on a piece of paper that slates all the properties that are given as proposed properties for this type of thing, that 2000 El Camino Real, which happens to be Starbucks right next door, they've got the smallest property, one of the smallest on our block, and they're slated for if you took the chambers in there and you timed it times 2 or 3, you would have the entire amount of their size of their property. It's not very big. How are you going to put a 4-story building on top of that? I don't know. A lot of these properties are really narrow, and they really just don't seem to fit for what you want to do. And I've been on the El Camino, my family's been on the El Camino, not me because I'm not that old, since 1933. We've been serving the community, hiring people, we've been paying taxes, we've been helping out the city of Palo Alto, and I think we're getting, I feel like a boa constrictor is going around us, and kind of squeezing the air out of us and squeezing the life out of us by doing this. I mean, maybe I just don't understand. But the actual sidewalk width issue seems to be unsettled, okay? And this seems to be built upon a 12-foot sidewalk and a sidewalk issue that's not settled as to how big the sidewalk is truly going to be. Is that going to affect it? I really don't know, because I don't have a good grasp on this. But the laws are supposed to be just, okay? I think they are anyways. But like so many other people, property owners on El Camino Real, I found out about the 2005 sidewalk width increase to 12 feet in March of this year, when the city wanted to widen sidewalks up to 18 feet in front of my little store.
We're 3 minutes.
Okay, all right. I just want to say that I don't think it's fair to take property without even calling or getting a hold of the people that you're taking it from. And that's what happened in our case. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker is Peter Eng, to be followed by Robert Moss.
Thank you very much. We're just recent property owner of a piece of property on El Camino Real. My first question is, has the staff put together a diagram of all the property along El Camino Real as to the size, how viable it is to make this a grand boulevard? Because there are some properties that are rather narrow and small. What are we going to do about these property when you want 18 feet setback? Okay, so that's going to be standing like a sore thumb while other properties are forced to abide by the 18 feet sidewalk. And I was wondering if the question come up when the council or the commissioner asks the staff to do this and this study, have they ever put themselves into the position of ours? How do we feel if you put this thing through? I was a member of the planning department one time. Somebody said, let's create a historical value or historical site designation on this property. He said, Peter, look into it. My first question was, if I was a property owner, my value of the property is increased one way, but it's limited in another way. For example, if I want to show the historical site, how many owners would want to buy this piece of building, this building? The second thing, what will the city do to help the historical designated piece of property in terms of, renovation, decorating, and so on and so forth? Zero. So there it is. So I hope the staff will take a serious look how this particular ordinance will affect property owner if you were the property owner. Another issue that I have is in terms of liability and insurance. When we have an increased sidewalk, who is responsible for this increased piece of property when somebody is injured? Is the city going to step in and help us? Or say, oh, you property owner have to do it. Well, you took this property, but just like any sidewalk, who's liable for it? I think we have to give this kind of matter some serious considerations. I think what I'm feeling is the city had made some mistake allowing building built out to the sidewalk or beyond the sidewalk. Now they want us, some of us, to pay for their mistake. And I think it's kind of unfair. El Camino will never be a grand boulevard. I can assure you that much. Look at Atherton, no sidewalk. How grand is that? Just a lot of trees. And you go down to Mountain View. What kind of grand boulevard we have? Are we going to be an isolated instrument? Oh, Palo has a grand boulevard. Another step towards being a snappy city? I wonder. So please do consider the fact seriously. Put yourself in our shoe when you consider making this and this kind of grandiose scheme for the city. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Robert Moss, to be followed by Julie Handley, and that's currently our last speaker.
Thank you. First, some general comments. I agree with the previous speakers who say that the Grand Boulevard concept is garbage, and there's no reason for Palo Alto to try to do anything to comply with it along El Camino. We are not the same as San Mateo or Redwood City or even Atherton. So we should be doing what is important and what fits our city. Second, it is perfectly legitimate for the city to change the zoning and land use issues and goals and requirements. Legal, and it's appropriate if it's found necessary to make the city work better. Now on some specifics. On the design requirements, I think it's very important to have setbacks along the main streets. Two of the projects that I have heard the most complaints about, people have just come up to me in the street and said, this is terrible. Alto Plaza, with the building, currently now it's a grocery outlet, right up on the sidewalk. And the second one, you may not think of, the old Hyatt Ricky's site, where we have housing set in just a few feet from El Camino and from Charleston. You'd think because it's set back and there's landscaping, people wouldn't care. They care. Until the Alto Plaza site was redeveloped, that was the one I heard the most complaints about. So it is important to have adequate setbacks, and there's no reason why new development, and we're not talking about any of the existing buildings or the existing businesses being impacted by this. They can stay where they are, as long as they want to. But new development should have setbacks. And since we don't want parking in there, you should also be telling them, oh, in that setback, why don't you put landscaping? Right now, it's left kind of open. Now, one of the problems in the staff suggestion is it talks about building with context. And from years of experience going to ARB meetings, nobody knows what context means. Context means right hand this day, and a month later, context means left hand. And a month or two later, it's up in the ceiling. So you should be specific about what you mean in context. Talk about matching the adjacent setbacks, matching heights, the type of facades you're going to allow. Be more specific. I'm not telling you what to put in there. I'm just saying that you should put in something that everybody understands. The developer, the architect, the staff, planning commission, and council. Because otherwise, you're going to have everybody coming in saying, this is no good. What are you doing to my property? We don't need that. Finally, I think it's important that we have setbacks at the corners of the adjacent streets, like the picture you have at Barron. It's important that you show an entry to the residential streets to lead off of El Camino. That gives you some context.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Julie Hanley, and is there anybody else who wishes to speak?
Thank you. I apologize for being late. Just couldn't help it. I am the owner of Dinah's Garden Hotel, and of course my property is located between Restradero and San Antonio on El Camino. And we also have what is now the Sea Restaurant, which used to be Trader Vic's, and before that, Dinah's Shack. So I have a pretty good sized piece of property there. And in some ways, some of this could certainly become very profitable for me as far as development. But for right now, I'm running a very, very nice hotel, and it's doing very well. And there are at least 3 large pieces of property that are coming online very quickly, 1 apartment building and 2 hotels in that very same area. And the setbacks there are very minimal to the sidewalk. So basically, when I saw, Tracy sent me the information from Amy French, which was very helpful. I didn't have a chance to read all of it. I was concerned when I read that, there is going to be probably a great deal of opposition. She didn't mention those properties specifically, but I'm sure that was part of the context of, one of the city council members said that when they unveil what is now going to be, I think, Homewood Estates or Homewood long-term stay hotel, there's going to be quite a bit of pushback from the public that there were no setbacks. And that is as it may be, but the point is that ship has sailed. Those buildings are built, they were built recently, and we can't do anything about it. And to impose 18-foot setbacks and some of these other things on future owners is not only a taking, but also is going to be entirely inconsistent with our El Camino, which will never be, as many people have said, a grand boulevard. Like I say, that ship has sailed, the horse is out of the barn on that. I think moving forward, Palo Alto needs to focus on what's best for Palo Alto as far as parking and traffic. Traffic is already a nightmare in that area, and when these 3 properties come online, it will be even worse. So I know people are considering a 2-year development plan, and I would like to roll all this into that so that you come up with a plan that makes it really pleasant to keep our lives in Palo Alto. Thank you.
So I wonder if staff or Director Gill would like to respond to any of the points made.
Yeah. Thank you, Chair Michael. If I could just say a few things, and then obviously Amy, Cara, and I are here to answer the Commission's questions. First, I wanted to say that this ordinance, as it's proposed to you this evening, does not impose an 18-foot setback. That ordinance was considered by the City Council and rejected. There's no change in the required setback in the ordinances before the Commission this evening. We are also not here to reconsider what happened in 2005. That's just beyond the purview of this meeting. What we are talking about is this somewhat esoteric concept. I will grant you that. It was thought of by urban designers, people who think about the design of good places and what they feel and look like. It's a concept called the build-to line. That requirement currently exists in city code, and this ordinance would eliminate it for some streets in Palo Alto and make it less onerous on El Camino. So for those who are concerned that we're doing something to make development more difficult, this ordinance would actually do the opposite. Now, I would submit to you that perhaps we have not been clear in the way this is drafted, because all of the speakers who spoke to you this evening didn't understand those points. So we would welcome the Commission's suggestions about how this language could be clarified, but the intention of the ordinance, as I said, is not to change the setbacks. It's to relieve property owners of the build-to line requirement on most streets that it applies to, and to increase the flexibility, in other words, loosen the onerous requirements on El Camino. So with that, maybe we can answer your questions about the specifics of the ordinance, and you can help us think of some ways that this might be made more clear.
Oh, thank you for that. Maybe we can have a context-based discussion. And
Just ask it.
let me recognize Commissioner Alcheck, and you'll have 5 minutes.
Director, I wonder if you could help me understand this a little bit. Are you suggesting that what we're reviewing tonight, that any property owner could develop the exact same site before this ordinance and after this ordinance, that essentially you're saying that you're making it the rules more flexible, but they could still build what they could before the ordinance?
Yes.
I wonder if we want to ask the individual who's representing clients here, the attorney, to sort of respond to that, just in case he has a different impression as having had an opportunity to look at this from a legal perspective, only have him respond to that notion that this isn't actually changing anything if you want to.
So I'm forgetting your last name, Andy. There's a question directed.
Sure.
Andrew Pierce. Andrew Pierce.
Sorry, Pierce.
Did you hear Commissioner Alcheck's question?
Yeah, I disagree with the description that was given. Let me make one quick point, which is that we agree setbacks are constitutional. We don't agree that a setback that requires a sidewalk is unconstitutional, because that's a right-of-way. And a right-of-way is a taking. With regard to this ordinance, it adds language for El Camino, requiring the setback be based on the context-based design. There is another way of doing it. You could simply leave it up to the property owner to build to line or not. That's not what you're doing here. You're saying we're going to have a context design review in every single case. And so if we want to make it an 18-foot setback, we can, because that's what we think the context is. And if we don't want it to be an 18-foot, we want you to build to line, we can make you do that, because we haven't repealed build to line for El Camino. So it is not more flexible. It is more flexible for the commissions, perhaps. It's not more flexible for the landowners.
Which section are you referring to specifically?
I'm referring to the new language that can be found in section 18.16.060, the table 3, under build to lines. There's a sentence at the bottom of the version I got off the web that says wall percentage and building setback based on context-based design set forth in chapter 18.16. That's new. So it used to say 50% to the build to line. Now it says based on context-based design. Well, if you go to that, that's got a 12-foot requirement, and it says the requirement can be greater along El Camino. And that's in section 3F at the very end of the ordinance. It says, on El Camino, placement of building frontage shall be based on context, including land use nearby properties. So presumably that's over and above the 12 feet that is already required. That is why we view this as more onerous on El Camino, perhaps the rest of the city not so much.
Director Gilman?
Thank you, Chair Michael. If I could respond to that, I think the speaker is pointing out, language that maybe is not as artful as it could be in that last bullet in the table, both tables. And there's a way to modify that language to achieve the objectives of the ordinance, which are exactly as I indicated, to make this less onerous. If it said instead of its current draft, if it said wall percentage may be reduced based on context-based design criteria set forth in chapter 18.60 of this code,
So if you
blah, 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 blah.
eliminate building setback.
Just eliminate building setback and insert instead may be reduced. And I think we've achieved what our objective is and responded to the concern of the commenter.
Commissioner Alchek, you want to continue, or does that resolve your point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was my specific question. If we're going to have a comment session, I can wait.
Okay, great. Commissioner Tanaka.
Yeah, so can staff talk about why was this original build line created? And what are the benefits of having this? And what do you think are the issues that might be brought up as this is loosened up a bit?
Okay, losing my voice a bit, so, well, I think what, if I trace back in history, much of El Camino Real had a 10-foot setback, special setback. I referenced that in my presentation from Matadero South back in 1973 until the early 80s. The code from the 80s, 90s, when I first got here, anyways, in the late 90s, said that in the CN zone, you need to have a 10-foot setback landscape along the CN properties. Many of those CN properties are south of Camino. So then, right after that, there was the El Camino guidelines, and there was an urban designer hired, Van Meter Williams Pollock, who came through in a community kind of outreach way to some degree. There were ARB meetings, there were planning commission meetings. I have to assume they were all noticed. And those concepts were discussed. And then it was followed by the zoning ordinance update. Again, the intent being the presence on El Camino, a very wide street. We should allow taller buildings. We should encourage, mixed use was the big thing back in the day. Trying to get more presence on the street, more mass on the street, have things come up, stop doing the strip mall parking lots. So I think those are all the origins of how we got there. And then finessing, the code being finessed to say 0 to 10 feet addressed, a desire or a nod to the former code from 1998 that said in the CN you have to have a 10-foot setback. So, in the CS zone it was a 0 setback, in the CN zone it was a 10-foot setback. And then the build to being, again, that urban design concept.
So what were the benefits of having this wall of buildings?
The benefits was that, again, we wouldn't have a building here and then a parking lot and then a building and a parking lot, or maybe it's a veterinarian clinic at the back of the lot, kind of at a more urban edge. The Grand Boulevard, is one way of putting it, having more of an urban wide boulevard with trees. Trees were very much a part of that as well. There were several documents that came through back in that time. There was this El Camino Real master planning study back in 2003. There's a lot of attention to El Camino, which is why we felt the Build 2 line still had some value on El Camino. Not only are we using these South El Camino guidelines when we talk to applicants and at the ARB, but there's a long history of having a focus on El Camino and building placement.
So basically, the point was to try to make it more walkable and more interesting for the pedestrians up and down El Camino, so that they don't go like blowing stuff in front, and then you go down 5 stores and there's everything set way back, like the strip mall type of layout, and then things. So that's the idea is to keep everything in front, so that's more of a kind of a downtown walkable pedestrian field. That's basically it.
Yeah, I don't think anyone ever envisioned that someone would walk the length of El Camino Real. There was supposed to be in the guidelines, there was, again, the focus on nodes and corridors. The nodes were centered near neighborhoods, Cal Ave, that second downtown, the El Camino Way kind of triangle area. The goal was to have the residents would go shopping there. They would come out of the neighborhoods and go to a kind of a larger area, and that would be walkable. And then people driving on El Camino would have a more grand experience with not a lot of strip parking. They might not get up and walk, but it's more of a boulevard.
What do you think are the negatives of having a more looser standard of Build 2 that's being proposed tonight?
Well, a looser standard, we would not have to process design enhancement exceptions for somebody that has 49% of their wall at the Build 2 line. We've had this happen time and again, where they just can't get that 50% for whatever reason. I think a good example is that yoga center right there in Middlefield, where they, weren't at their 50% at the 25-foot setback, and it's just kind of the code was working against having a building that made sense with the use that was proposed. So the context-based, those discussions we tried to put in their land use, a number of things that we as staff and the ARB could use to say, well, in this sense, it makes sense to do something different. I don't know. It wasn't intended to make people push back farther, but just to say, okay. And I think that Director Gilman has come upon a great solution that I wish we thought of months ago, to say, let's loosen up that percentage, which is really what makes sense.
Well, my time ran out. I can keep asking questions if you want.
We'll give you a second round. All right, who's next? President, Commissioner Curtis?
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. I will have a couple of questions just to follow up on this, consideration of other options, right? So I have three questions. So let's start with the first one. Were the other options considered in lieu of loosening the standards, as opposed to of this 50%
yes.
wall?
Yes, we considered the first consideration was to remove the Build 2 line altogether. That standard, to just get rid of that whole thing, eliminate it from the code entirely. To not have a Build 2 standard, not have a percentage wall, any of that.
We also considered a much more complicated ordinance that the members of the audience have spoken to, which would have increased setbacks. So, we've already been down this road with an alternate ordinance considered by the Commission, the ARB, and the Council, and rejected. And so now we're back with alternative 2, which eliminates the standard on some streets, reduces it on El Camino as as Amy points out, we could have gone even farther, just reduced it, eliminated everywhere, but I think as Commissioner Tanaka was getting at, it does, we feel, have some benefit in terms of creating a coherent design and place along what is really a significant thoroughfare and boulevard in Palo Alto.
Right, okay. I'm going to call a 1-minute break so we can change the tape on the equipment. So, Mr. Gardias?
Yes, just responding to Ms. Gilman's comment, right, about removal of the build-to line, right? So the objective is pretty much just to allow further accessibility from the street side, yet still maintain at least portion of the street elevation, right? So eliminating totally the build-to line would put this street line at risk, because it would allow for variations that we may not be able to control otherwise, right? So were there any other options besides of this, what you said? Something that would still maintain this facade, but still allow for the greater flexibility?
I can't think of, I mean, I guess what we're trying to do is based on the council's direction, is go into the existing code, change it just, as little as possible to achieve the objectives of relaxing this one specific standard. So, if you have alternative methods to get to that same objective, we'd be happy to hear about that.
Okay. I was just wondering if there was anything that was considered. So, the second question is like this. We talk about El Camino and Middlefield, and were other streets affected with the removal of the build-to line?
Yes, San Antonio Road is another main thoroughfare, and then of course the side streets in those areas, side streets of Middlefield, side streets of San Antonio, side streets of El Camino.
Okay, so mainly those three streets, right? El Camino, yes. Middlefield, and San Antonio.
Right, because like Alma, for instance, is not zoned CS, CN, or CC.
Right.
Yeah, and there's no build-to.
So in terms of this, what my colleague was alluding to before, right, about the risks, right? With removal of this requirement of the build-to line on the properties, what's the risk of just returning to the property and the parking lot, so basically creating the thief that you talk about, the thief concept that you talk about at the beginning? What's the risk of just recreating this whole elevation?
Well, there's been some progress, if you want to think of it that way, by having these guidelines in place, and the development we have gotten has been forward on the lot. If we did away with the built-in line, the consequence of having a parking lot with a building at the back is what we might get. And it just goes back to the focus on auto first. And I would hope that retail would still want to go forward on the lot and show their wares in the windows, but then again, maybe not. Maybe it's more convenient to drive the car in and shop at the back of the lot, right? So I guess the consequence is, that's more of a suburban strip design, or lack of design.
Yes, it may be welcoming on Middlefield, right, but may not be desired on some other streets, right?
Right, because on Middlefield you can now come and park in the front in that 25-foot. In fact, you can't put the building in the first 25 feet. So you can park in the front there. But it's a kind of a different street than Camino.
Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Rosenblum?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to continue just asking some of the questions to staff in response to some of the things raised. So we had a lot of speakers all talk about this as a taking and a devaluation of their current properties, it seems. And I want to ask you your understanding of those comments, because I couldn't read the ordinance in any way but applying. So first, the clarification was that this only relaxes existing rules. But second, it seems quite clear that it only applies to future construction. Is that correct, or am I missing something?
That's correct.
Okay, so all of these are property owners, they're represented by an attorney, so, and we may have to go another round back to them, and I'm happy to mix with people after this, and just to understand where the gap is. But what is your understanding of the gap? Is it the case that the concern is if they sell their property in the future, if someone were to want to tear it down and rebuild something, that would be restricted based on this ordinance, and therefore the resale value would go down? Is that your understanding of the concern? Because it's certainly not taking in the sense of, we had an engineer talk about the nonlinear devaluation of the property because you're taking off a certain portion. It's certainly not that. It's something about some future restriction on the redevelopment. Is that correct?
Yes. I don't think we want to characterize what the motivations of the speakers were.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, you can defer to them, but, we are secure in our knowledge that there is no taking here.
Okay.
We are not affecting the setbacks. We are not requiring additional sidewalk width. We are simply trying to relax a standard that is quite esoteric, and it's based in this concept of achieving good urban design along the border.
Okay, and so then the second question, Commissioner Alchek already asked fairly explicitly, which is if they were to sell the property, could the exact same building be built? And the answer to that seemed to be clearly yes. Was that also?
Well, if there's a building that's there at 8 feet back from the curb, which is a zero property line.
I see.
And there's a new building there, the code currently requires a 12-foot sidewalk.
Right, but this doesn't change the current code. The current code has only been made more relaxed. They're already under that restriction.
That's correct, since 2005.
Okay. So the final comment, so that answers most of my questions. I am a little bit still confused by what seems to be a fairly large gap between the members of the public and what's been presented. And this seemed to be, by the way, the case the first time. I think many of the speakers are probably the same when this came before council. There's a lot of discussion and taking. And there does seem to be some dissonance there. So I do think we need to get to the bottom of this. And to the extent that there are people here from the media, it would be helpful to try to clarify these things because you have a platform. The final bit I'll say is I am concerned with this opening the door on other streets to strict mallization of those streets, because we say, well, this build to seem to be esoteric and restrictive. On these other streets, we don't want to be so restrictive. We are going to get rid of that because overly burdensome restrictions are not good. And I do like the fact that we are generally a city free of most things that we recognize as a strip mall. We have some, but generally our neighbors to the north and the south have more. And that's probably been the result of some of these restrictions. And so I think that would be a pity if 2 years from now we're kind of, sitting at this table and just say, well, it's now we got rid of these restrictions and now we have a bunch of strip malls that I guess technically are allowed by this new code. And so, am I correct now in saying that at Middlefield and San Antonio, because of this, that's?
No. The only consequence of deleting the build to line on San Antonio and Middlefield is that the percentage of building wall at that 25-foot setback on Middlefield and 24 on San Antonio, that you no longer have to have a 50% of the frontage in a wall that is on that line.
Right.
That's gone. But, could they go further back than 25 feet? Yes, but we still have an ARB. We still have, findings.
Right, so it turned into more of a soft, so as Mr. Moss stated, it's a looser, like contextual problem now and not a hard, must build to this line problem.
All I'm saying is they can build a parking lot in the front now on the streets. And they do exist there, and that's probably as a result of a 25-foot special setback.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner King.
Thank you. Let's see. First, I want to address one thing regarding your statement that this is wholly less restrictive. In the one case where it's referred to as the cleanup, such that in the case of the mixed use, now we're not allowing parking right within the first 10 feet, that does seem like that's more restrictive than what currently exists.
Right, because that only exists right now for non-residential use in Table 3.
Okay, so then my question is, if we're saying this is completely benign, doesn't it impede property owners from anything that currently isn't there, that would seem to be contrary to that. And if so, why are we choosing now in a seemingly unrelated ordinance change to clean up at this point?
I guess it's a vestige of the last effort on the sidewalk width that came up at Planning Commission that we tried to accommodate. And it's in there because we didn't really see that there was a reason.
If I could also respond to that. So one of the issues raised with respect to a taking on the first ordinance was there was a concern that the city was taking more of the private property for sidewalk. And so that was the concern voiced by the public. But here on that parking issue, we're not saying that the front portion of the property that now can't be used as parking should be used as an effective sidewalk. We're saying that, we're just kind of codifying the intent of the whole Grand Boulevard design guidelines and this ordinance, which is no parking in the front.
Okay.
So
all right.
we're not taking any property right as a result of that.
Yeah, I understand.
Which was
Thank
the
you for
original
making that
question.
clarification. And yet, still, it is for someone who might have a mixed-use project they were thinking of building. It now, if council were to approve this, would now be different what they could build. And so, and the goal for that is just not. Why don't we want? I think.
Well, I mean, it's because right now, if you had a parking lot, right there, there's another requirement that's not in here. It's in parking lot design requirements. You have to have a 5-foot landscaped buffer between the first parking space and the property line. So in reality, we're really just talking about the second 5 feet, because the first 5 feet should be a landscaped buffer.
So you're saying really it doesn't, that ability doesn't exist, so it's not truly changing anything other than making it absolutely clear.
Yeah, I think it was just a suggestion that came along during the last round that we just kept in there. So
okay.
It doesn't really need to be there, frankly, because we have that first 5 feet as landscaped, unless, if somebody's really bothered by that second, the 5 to 10 foot space being a parking stall.
Okay, thank you. And then regarding and by the way, it would be appreciated if on the ordinance portion, if there was pagination, if you have page numbers on here, it'd just be easier as we're flipping back and forth. And so if we go to the second page of that, so I'm looking at and so basically, just to be clear, everything that is underlined is new from the existing ordinance, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And that's crossed out was on the previous ordinance and is now gone based on this proposed new ordinance, correct? Okay, and then when we say wall percent and building setback based on context-based design criteria set forth in 18.16, I know if I would make, I don't know how long that is, but it makes it a little confusing that then we just have an excerpted ordinance, although I assume what you're saying here is that nothing else changes. Everything in 18.16 that applies to this is shown here, is excerpted, such as F, section 3F, okay. And so the context-based design criteria already exists, and so today that is already part of the ordinance?
Correct.
Okay, and so really that's then deferring to ARB as the sort of police that something good gets built that we like as a community, and now we're just basically deferring more control to them if it drops below the 50% setback.
Well, they're a recommending body, so yeah, we do listen to what they have to say, but it's a director's decision, and ultimately the council's on appeal if people disagree with whether the project meets the context-based design.
Okay. So again, just to reinforce, it's providing more flexibility than currently exists, and which we would think would be better, other than that one portion about arguably about the mixed use. Okay. And then I would say on item F, unless I'm missing something, it seems like there's a verb missing in there. It just says, a majority of the buildings plan footage located within such as along El Camino Real. It doesn't, am I missing something? Should there be?
Should be located.
Yeah, or must be, whatever. Am I wrong though? I don't see a verb
It's,
in
well,
there.
it's
Should be.
a design criteria, so I guess should.
Oh, and yeah, it's hard with, again, excerpted, it makes it a little bit hard to see, but if appropriate, I would think that would be good. And then one last comment would be, in the findings, section 1 findings, A, recent new developments have been built, particularly along El Camino Real, that are inconsistent with local and regional visions for vibrant boulevards. I would, well, I'll ask why, and then why don't we have that? I mean, if someone were coming from outer space and wanted to understand what the heck we're doing, that doesn't really explain why. They might say, well, why doesn't it fit our vision for vibrant boulevards? So I don't know if you want to address why it doesn't. I think you kind of went through that at the very beginning, where we were, the previous urban planning mantra of everything up at the street. I guess that's it, right? And now we're saying that was overly restrictive.
I think that finding is so broad that the remaining 4 findings would do the job without that.
Okay, yeah, I'll leave that to Commissioner for discussion when we move forward. Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So firstly, I'd like to address the idea that the build-to line is benign, and even when relaxed. As a programmer, if you will, a computer scientist, I remember that there was a paper written years ago that said go-to considered harmful. And I think build-to lines are considered harmful. And my case in point of build-to lines are considered harmful is because Alma Village, originally was called Alma Plaza, which by the way was a CN zone when the setback, has a 30-foot setback along Alma. However, the El Camino design guidelines were applied to Alma Street, even though there's a distance between Alma Street and El Camino. Said, oh, we should build things up to the street because of that. So the idea of the existence of build-to lines on El Camino were applied to Alma Village as justification for building the monstrosity up onto the street. And I remember that distinctly as an argument being made by the developer at the point in time when it went before the council in a PC zone from hell. So even though it's PC now, it's still, that process caused a lot of changes in the PC process that are still needed. It seems to me that there's no real harm, per se, in having buildings set back at different lengths, because it adds a little more interest. And in fact, new buildings that are redeveloped will have a further setback than buildings that exist now at 8 feet. So if you admit that the idea that some pre-existing buildings, grandfathered buildings, are set at 8 feet, and new buildings are set at 12 feet, then there already is this sawtooth effect. And therefore, in some sense, you're already assuming that, and therefore, in some sense, the idea of the build-to requirement is superfluous. Now, there is something that a build-to requirement accomplishes. In hearing Ms. French talk about the reason for the build-to requirement is you don't want parking in front of the building. Then why not a requirement that you don't want parking in front of the building in El Camino? Simple as that. And then you don't have a build-to requirement. So I'm suggesting the following. First of all, that requirement be that there's no parking in front of buildings in El Camino Real. Number 2, eliminate the build-to requirements, that whole row of the table in Table 3 and Table 4. Thirdly, delete the reference to the build-to line in Table 3, footnote 7, and Table 4, footnote 1. There's additional language that's been added on. Just delete that additional language because you're eliminating the build-to requirement. And instead simply saying that we have no parking on El Camino in front of buildings. And I think that accomplishes what you want. And after all, essentially the developers won't want to set back their building too far unless there's a business reason for doing that, because they can't do it for the purpose of putting parking in front. And therefore, if they want to have arcades or if they want to have seating for restaurants or things like that. For example, Equinox came before us in part because of the issue of the setback. And there was a variance required for the setback. It was not, there's not a design enhancement exception. It was, I believe it was a variance, although correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Yeah, on the side street, actually.
Yeah, but in any event, the issue is that this essentially eliminates that problem and gives more teeth gives more discretion, not teeth, gives more discretion to the ARB. There's one other change that I'd like to make to this, and that change is on this paragraph F. And I think that Mr. Pierce, the attorney, referred to the last sentence of paragraph F that's being added. On El Camino Real, placement of buildings shall be based on. And that shall be means required to be. It is a mandated language. And I'm not sure that that's intended because these are guidelines. And I assume that the language really should be on El Camino Real, placement of building frontage already be considered based on the context, including land use and whatever. And that basically gives discretion to the ARB to consider those things in the context of this. For example, I would expect that if you have a tall building, you want it set further back. If you have a short building, you may want it set not as far back. To me, that's considering the context of the building. If you have other buildings that are set further back, then you might want this building set a little further back. So give the ARB discretion on that, not a requirement. So I don't know if I should make a motion to that effect. We'll have a second round. But when you come around, I'd like to make a motion to the effect of the things that I talked about, and I welcome ideas from comments on other commissioners on the suggestion that I have. Thank you.
Okay. So give me 5 minutes.
Chair,
please.
Chair, am I going this round?
You did.
Oh, you're first.
That was the question. So first I'd like to sort of compliment the city and the residents collectively that there's a number of indications that perhaps as a result of the Our Palo Alto effort, there's much more public input on the comp plan. I've been seeing this in different forums, and oftentimes it comes in response to anonymous resident comments on the Palo Alto Online articles. But wherever it comes, it seems like it's coming. So please keep it coming, because I think this is helpful. And then I think Director Gilman made helped us understand that neither the Grand Boulevard Initiative itself nor the El Camino Real design guidelines are on our agenda this evening. So these are important topics, but they're not on the agenda. So I believe that that's very appropriate as part of the comp plan update, that the public get involved in expressing thoughts or questions about any policies or programs that might relate to these past efforts, but they're not what we're talking about tonight. I think given the pretty clear statements from staff that the effort that's been made is consistent with direction from the council to eliminate some of the restrictions and loosen up the requirements. It's really striking that there's a lack of public enthusiasm for the results of that effort. So I'm curious if perhaps we haven't got the formula quite right yet, or maybe it's a bit too complicated. I think generally I think it's inapplicable, but there's Occam's razor is the simplest explanation is often the best. This is pretty complicated, and it might work better if it were presented in a more simple, straightforward fashion, if that were possible. So one question I have for Director Gilman. Would you like us to finalize a recommendation this evening with, I think you're hearing that there's going to be some potential edits from the commission, or would you prefer that we give you all our thoughts and continue the final vote to a future meeting so that the staff has a chance to incorporate our comments in that draft?
Well, thank you, Chair Michael. I think we would like to get the sense of the commission about where this is heading. Some of you apparently want to make a dramatic change to this ordinance and just eliminate this whole requirement. So we'd like to know if that's the direction of the commission, or if what you want to do is just adjust some of the language and preserve the intent of the ordinance the staff has drafted. Maybe once we know the will of the commission in that regard, we can respond to your question about whether we want to bring back another version.
Well, maybe I can try a different way.
Okay.
And that is, so the commission is an advisory body to the council. And the council on June 2nd had a public hearing, which was pretty, had a lot of participation from the public and a lot of criticism about the sidewalk topic, which is also not on our agenda this evening. I wasn't clear myself if the council wanted to build 2 lines just eliminated entirely, which might be simple, or if they wanted it eliminated elsewhere than Alto and something that very carefully addressed. So is that what the council would like from the commission?
Well, I'd have to go back and review their minutes. I don't think it was 100% clear precisely what ordinance they wanted us to deliver back to them. I think they're grateful, as always, for the input of the commission. It was clear that they did not want to tackle the setback increases. They did think some adjustment to the build 2 line was merited, and they wanted us to come back with that. There was also a discussion about the usefulness and the importance of the South El Camino design guidelines. And that's part of the reason we're proposing not to eliminate the build 2 line entirely, but to adjust it as it affects El Camino. Because there was an extended discussion at the City Council about how important those El Camino design guidelines have been, even to the extent that many of them have been incorporated into the context-based design criteria that are in the code.
So just putting on my common sense, reasonable man hat if I have one, it seems to me that most property owners would probably want to, to have a structure or improvement to their property that would maximize the potential lot coverage and floor area ratio. And in this day and age, and the cost of Palo sort of raw land, the incentive to devote some of it to surface parking and to the strip mall thing is probably not as likely as it was 50 years ago, and maybe unlikely, in the extreme. But let me, I think I've used up my time in this round. Let me reverse the order and go first to Vice Chair Keller, because I suspect you'd like to make a motion.
I'm not sure where you get that idea from. So I move that the ordinance as proposed be submitted to the City Council with the following, for consideration with the following changes. Firstly, findings A through D are to be used, but finding E is dropped. In finding C, the El Camino Boulevard is replaced with El Camino Real on the first line, and the reference to the Grand Boulevard Initiative is deleted. In finding D, the reference to the Grand Boulevard, reference to the Grand Boulevard Initiative is also deleted. Secondly, there's a reference in the Table 3 and Table 4 in a manner to be determined by staff that on El Camino Real, no parking is allowed in front of buildings. Thirdly, the Build 2 requirements are removed from Table 3 in terms of the row labeled Build 2 lines, and also deleting Table 3, deleting this whole row, Build 2 line, that whole section across, the whole row across that says Build 2 lines, that whole entire row and all the things, all the bullets to the right, they're all eliminated for El Camino and everywhere, doesn't matter where it is. However, the requirement, their corresponding requirement on Table 3 is that the added language, the Build 2 line requirement does not apply to Stanford Shopping Center and Town and Country Shopping Center properties. That is also deleted because it's now superfluous. Similarly, the same change is made to Table 4. The Build 2 lines row, that entire row all the way across, is deleted, as well as the language, the Build 2 line requirement in footnote 1 is deleted. And footnote 1, the footnote 1 language, it says Build 2 line requirements. The rest of footnote 1 stays. Footnote 1 of Table 4.
Which is,
So the language that's added there that says, the Bill 2 line requirement does not apply to Stafford Shopping Center and Town and Country Shopping Center properties, that's all deleted. And that's my motion.
Okay, is there a second?
No way, no way.
I have a clarifying question before.
No way.
It'll become your comment.
Can we,
Commissioner Rosenblum.
just for procedurally, I'd like to ask staff for some advice on whether this was considered and why, why wasn't this part of the consideration set? I'm intrigued by it. It sounds logical. I'm worried about unintended consequences that people with more experience in staff planning.
So
when do we do that?
So first, is there a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Commissioner King. Now Commissioner Rosenblum is asking staff to clarify if the changes reflected, expressed by Vice Chair Keller are considered in their drafting.
Yeah, so I'll just to clarify the question, I think it should be clear, but in case it's not, it sounds logical. It sounds like this does achieve what the intention is of this ordinance without having an arbitrary line drawn that makes business owners feel insecure about the future of their buildings, et cetera. Is there an unintended consequence or gotcha that I'm not thinking about right now?
Well, I'm going to answer that first. When I heard that the motion included keeping parts of the footnotes 1 and 7, I mean, the whole reason for those footnotes is because of the Bill 2 line, so I would just say, if you're going to delete part of that footnote, delete the whole thing, because the reason it says we want to have 20, we want to allow them to do 25 feet is because that's related to the Bill 2 line, I believe. To answer the question, staff juggles the El Camino Real guidelines and the code. It's helpful when the code and the guidelines are similar, but they haven't been similar because the guidelines have a 75-foot percentage, when the code said 50%. So they haven't been exactly jiving, though the intention was there for both. So now it's going to be a little bit challenging because we'll have, if we go forward with this, because got to change those guidelines or to say we disregard those because they're now not applicable.
Right, but just to, sorry, go ahead.
If I could just add to that, I'm not an urban designer. I consider myself a planner and a historic preservationist, but not an urban designer. This concept of the Bill 2 line grew out of an urban design study, more than one urban design study of El Camino, and I guess I'm a little nervous about just eliminating it if its design intention is still current and still appropriate for a really wide and important thoroughfare like El Camino. It seems to be that its intention to avoid the kind of too many gap teeth situations is still valid. The idea that there's flexibility built into it means that it doesn't or shouldn't pose a hardship. In fact, we don't see applicants requesting DEEs, Amy can correct me if I'm wrong, to get relief from the Bill 2 line along El Camino. People don't ask for that. What they ask for is relief from the Bill 2 line on the side streets, and we're proposing to eliminate that.
And I think, if there is a request for a DEE on El Camino, it might be because it's hard to place everything all in that one line, whereas the way we were loosening this up, having 10 feet in which to do that same thing really does loosen it up. So you're not stuck on a line, or you get more space to do that presence.
Okay. Now, our normal procedure is we allow the maker of the motion and the seconder to speak to their motion. So Vice Chair Keller, would you like to speak to your motion?
Yes, thank you. So firstly, I will address the comments made by planning official Amy French. And that is, the reason I want to keep the rest of footnote 1 of table 4 and footnote 7 of table 3 is because those are law as opposed to requirements, as opposed to the guidelines that are sort of guidelines to the ARB. which means that either these override the guidelines, and that's clear that no matter under the guidelines these are required, or alternatively, if staff wishes to, these might be moved into the guidelines, indicate that they override the guidelines. But I don't want to eliminate the guidelines. I simply want to say that the guidelines are to be considered, but are not requirements in terms of the build-to line. There's still discretion for the ARB in terms of this. That's the first thing. The second thing is this one particular, so if you want, I can make that a motion, the motion that the staff may decide to move the 25-foot driveway into the guidelines if staff wishes to do that?
Yeah, because those footnotes only are found in the build-to line. If you're eliminating the build-to line row, there is no, this footnote relates to no guideline, no standard.
Thank you. So let me make a friendly amendment to my own motion, which I will agree to. And that is that the remainder of the footnotes regarding the 25-foot driveway access permitted regardless of building frontage be moved into the guidelines in an appropriate place. And the second thing is something I forgot to say, is that in paragraph F of section 3, paragraph 3, that the statement, the last sentence read, on El Camino Real, placement of building frontage is to be considered based on context, including land use, and that indicates the discretionary rather than required, and I think that eliminates the potential for this being at all considered taking, because it does give discretion to that.
You stopped after land use, sorry to interrupt that.
Et cetera.
Okay.
Yes, et cetera. I'm just saying that's what I'm reading. The rest of it reads the same way it does now, just that instead of shall be, is to be considered.
Mr. King?
Do you want to second that, and then I'll continue?
Oh, I'll second that.
Thank you. So let me continue with this issue. So I'm not removing the El Camino design guidelines. Those still exist. What I'm simply removing is the requirement in code that there be any particular build-to lines. I think that economics now and economics in the future will essentially mean that people will not set their buildings back too far because they want to maximize the use of their properties. And secondly, the requirement that there be no parking in front of buildings in El Camino Real essentially eliminates the part that we seem to be worried about. And so essentially makes it completely discretionary with respect to the ARB and the developer in discussions, simplifies the code, and I think that essentially it's a requirement that is no longer needed. And remember, El Camino Real will have sawtooth when you have buildings that are redeveloped 10 feet to 12 feet, because there are other buildings that are 8 feet. So I think that the idea that there's going to be a solid wall, which I think is a bad idea anyway. Solid walls bounce noise. The walls that go back in and out actually break up noise and reduce the noise on either side. So from a noise perspective, there's also a reason for not having a solid wall. Thank you.
Commissioner King?
My only other comment was regarding a friendly amendment was that issue around the mixed use, but the way you've explained it to me is that it's not making any change, and it's making it more clear, I assume, to an applicant might come in, they're not going to head down the wrong path because they're going to see that clearly stated rather than find it out
in a different chapter.
Yeah. Okay. So that's anybody on this.
All right. So to the commission, Commissioner Gardias.
Yes, I'd like to speak in a different tone, right? I mean, just the build-to line, right, is an important tool for urban planning. So there are cities around the world are built with build-to line, and it's based on a variety of factors, right? Historical factors, energy efficiency factors, streetscaping factors, variety of those. So the reason that I'm trying just to show it from a different perspective, because I would be concerned with removal of this tool because we don't know the consequences of this, what would happen if we do so. So just to be safe, I would like to just ask about more time to understand what would be the consequence if we would consider a motion that Vice Chair Keller proposed. And for this reason, if there is a possibility of still having this in mind, but then consider it at the following meeting, I think it would be appropriate, as opposed to just moving with this motion without looking at some consequences that we would not consider otherwise.
So would you like to make a substitute motion?
Or a friendly amendment.
Or a friendly amendment to continue this
Yes, please.
topic?
If this can be a friendly amendment to this motion, to just move it to the following meeting.
I think you need a substitute motion.
No, I think it can be done as a friendly amendment, and the friendly amendment is, instead of referring this to the city council, it refers this to consideration at a future commission meeting, in which this is, the motion as made is the draft that goes before the next, to a future commission meeting.
Okay, do you accept the friendly amendment?
No, no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it in this term, right? So I didn't mean just to accept this this motion in this language. I would like to still just allow the time just to work and allow us just to review it. And of course, the motion would stay on the table, but it doesn't mean that I would just support this motion in this current form.
So I think the way we have to approach that under our procedures is if you make a substitute motion to continue this topic to a future meeting.
That probably will be correct.
Okay. Is there a second for the substitute motion?
Yeah.
Second by Commissioner Alchek. And would you like to have any further comments you want to make on your substitute motion?
No, thank you. I think that I made myself clear. It's just pretty much to recognize what would be the consequence of just pursuing this action.
Commissioner Alchek.
Okay, so I'm understanding your motion as, can we have more time tonight to discuss this?
Well, more time at the future meeting.
No, I think he's saying tonight.
No. Future meeting. Move it to the future meeting.
Got it.
Just tell you what this means before you act.
Okay. Well, I'd like more time tonight or at a future meeting. So I haven't had a chance yet to comment. I just asked the question, so I could use my first round of comment. And I'd also like a chance to respond to the motion. So I certainly second this motion to have more time because frankly, I'm surprised a little that you seconded the motion, considering that this parking sentence he added doesn't just restrict the parking from 5 feet, it actually pushes the parking to the back half of every property. So I just think there's a lot going on in this, that this is a much more significant change as an ordinance than what we have here today. And frankly, I can't imagine reviewing this without a staff report, at least some community involvement. So on 2 fronts, I would like more time.
Okay, so let me just try to clarify where we are in our procedure. So we've got a motion, substitute motion to continue this topic to a future meeting, seconded by Commissioner Alchek. What I would like to do is, before voting on the substitute motion, let's give the whole commission a full opportunity to raise any questions or comments they have, and then let's vote on the substitute motion. And Commissioner Alchek, would you like to start?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
If I could have a little bit more time.
Give him 7 minutes.
I won't take that. So I want to start by just saying that I don't agree with those who feel the Grand Boulevard vision is garbage. I think it's a great vision. I think that just because El Camino Real isn't a Grand Boulevard today doesn't mean that it can't be a place that pedestrian-friendly retail can exist. And I think that the model suggested by the Grand Boulevard is that there will be a greater residential presence along El Camino. And I believe that that residential presence will help facilitate a greater pedestrian retail-oriented environment. That being said, this is a substantially different discussion than we had on April 9th. On April 9th, we were talking about increasing the setback, and as a commission, we rejected that, and we suggested to council to not adopt that change, because one of the reasons I suggested we do that is because we shouldn't be we shouldn't have this discussion in a vacuum. We should be discussing the idea of increasing setbacks with increasing height. We should give and take. That was a big part of what I think was the impetus for my support for that rejection last time we met. Another component of that was to incorporate this discussion in a bigger Our Palo Alto discussion, as opposed to having like a very specific discussion about El Camino separate from everything else related to the Grand Boulevard. Because frankly, there's a lot of elements of the Grand Boulevard that I think bear discussion, and I think if we go through the Grand Boulevard piece by piece, it's a much more difficult process than sort of dealing with many components of it, including height, that mixed-use residential concepts, etc. I think, I also want to say that I think the notion of encouraging new development to meet the street is an important objective. I think the missing teeth metaphor is very, very apt. When someone's missing teeth, it's unsightly. We're not talking about misaligned teeth, we're talking about missing teeth. 4 or 6 feet difference is not a missing tooth. Missing tooth is I would suggest you look at the corner of Page Mill and you see that commercial office building where the Y is and that movie theater, that is a missing tooth. It is so far away from the street, and its neighbor, which probably has a smaller lot, is right up on the street, and that creates a vacuum. It's interesting to me, it reminds me of when a parking garage occupies a significant lot and creates a dead zone between retail spaces. And I'm reminded of when I first joined the commission, we met to discuss, I think it was Emerson, I can't remember exactly, the idea of limiting losses of retail uses. Didn't support that at the time, but I believe the commission supported a motion that would restrict owners' ability to convert their retail use to office use. And the reason why I believe the commission supported it at the time was because they wanted to not have, that the intent of that limitation was to ensure that there wouldn't be a vacuum created by commercial office space between more retail-oriented blocks. Now that was downtown. I believe the Grand Boulevard vision intends to create a more pedestrian, retail-oriented environment in El Camino. It's surprising to me that we would not want, through very flexible language, encourage buildings to build right up to the street, to meet the street, so that some of these owners who have very small lots can come right up to the street, no greater setbacks, right up to the street, which I assume most of them would do anyways, and encourage individuals who have huge lots, like hotel lots, to also bring their property up to the street so that it's pedestrian oriented without a vacuum like a parking garage presents or commercial office space between residential blocks presents. So I think for that reason, I really like this idea. If we're not wedded to the 10-foot parking restriction, then I would suggest that we, I thought I was in agreement with Commissioner King here, that we suggest that we take it out. That we don't create some new onerous, frankly, really not to create a new onerous parking requirement that restricts all parking within the front half of a property. I think that's a very big change that was sort of included in your motion. I think it'd be interesting to know what percentage or how many properties on El Camino are CC zoned. Those are properties that will have this new aspect. Again, I think what this ordinance is doing is it's encouraging a certain frontage that coincides with the notion of creating a uniform, pedestrian-friendly environment. I think that's a lofty goal. I assume that if we change the language if we substitute the language that Director Gittleman suggested at the very start of this meeting, which clarifies that we're not intending to change setbacks, I assume nobody in this room would have a problem with this ordinance, because all it in fact does is encourage you to develop your property in a way that supports this vision. It doesn't actually change anything. So it's a very painless ordinance in that regard. Finally, I agree with Commissioner Gardias that if we are interested in considering major changes, I think we should hear. I think the planning staff should bring a designer, an urban designer in to present to us, or two of them, pros and cons of this idea of building up build-to lines. I frankly think that we're lacking some expertise here, and it would make, I think, myself and maybe others more comfortable if we had a presentation about that, because the whole point of this is built to, and now we're replacing it with essentially a parking limitation that's, I think, much more onerous, to be honest. I mean, imagine for the hotel, that if she did a substantial remodel on her project that would qualify as new development, what would she do with the first half of her property if her hotel's in the back? Would she suddenly have to just put a lawn on it and not be able to park on it? I mean, I think these are considerations that would have to be explained in a staff report. I don't know. I think there's a lot there. So that's my comment.
Okay. Vice Chair Keller?
So let me make a couple of, thank you. Let me make a couple of observations. Actually, I should only 5 minutes, so let me make a couple of observations. The first observation is that the extensive remodel of Dinah's Hotel would not trigger eliminating the parking in front unless it was triggered by the Bill 2 line, which would be even more onerous than the parking issue. So I think that building is grandfathered, and as long as the footprint stays the same, my understanding is that they can remodel to their heart's content. Secondly, the issue is that I would suggest a friendly amendment to the motion on the floor. And the friendly amendment is that when this report comes back, when this item comes back before the commission, that the staff report, A, consider the impact, the potential effects of the original motion made, the underlying motion. 2, that it also consider the language change that Director Gittleman suggested. 3, that the staff report also consider the effects of footnote 10 in table 4 as a separate consideration, so that the commission can have adequate understanding, and that finally a recommendation that there be given more understanding to the commission in the staff report describing the interaction of the design guidelines and the context, what is it called? The
context-based design criteria.
Thank you. Context-based design criteria and the El Camino design guidelines, and whether the context-based design criteria in and of themselves will satisfy the needs of implementing the El Camino design guidelines, or whether the Bill 2 line requirement does that.
Does the maker of the substitute motion accept the friendly amendment?
Yes, I do accept. Thank you very much.
Okay, does the seconder accept the friendly amendment?
Sure.
And
Okay.
let me just make sure, did staff get the amendment?
Your clever thing with the percentage can be reduced.
I just want to make sure we understood what the request was. Got it?
Yes, I got it. Yeah, the whole thing, yeah, A, B, C, D.
Yeah.
So my sense is...
I'll say one more thing if I may. And that is, I am not opposed to the El Camino design guidelines or the Grand Boulevard initiative. My reason for taking it out of the findings is because the findings do not rely on the Grand Boulevard initiative. And in order to base, not that I'm opposed to the Grand Boulevard initiative, but the findings now rely on the Grand Boulevard initiative, which makes people think that this has to do with increased setbacks, which the Grand Boulevard initiative encourages. But by removing that as part of the findings, it actually, I think, will make people feel that this is actually more of a technical fix on that, and not saying we're going to ram the Grand Boulevard initiative down people's throats and increase the setbacks. That's why I deleted that, not to remove in any way the policies of the Grand Boulevard initiative from our process. Thank you.
Okay. So, has everybody had a chance to speak?
Yeah, so I'm going to support the motion to have more time to analyze this. I think it's actually worthwhile. I think it makes sense to give staff the time, give staff a chance to actually analyze the different options. I think one part of the analysis that wasn't asked for, which I do think would be useful, would be to understand what is the economic impact to the property owners by the various options. So, so that becomes a little bit more clear. I think that the other thing that I think would be useful to do with extra time is to actually get the community feedback. So, we had a pretty radical proposal, not that I oppose it, but it's very different from what was on the table tonight, at least brought forward by staff. And I don't think, I mean, I just listened to the community input tonight, and it really seemed like, for the most part, the community missed the point of what we're trying to do, at least the initial point of tonight's meeting, which was actually to make the build-to requirement easier. And yeah, a lot of people spoke.
Can you hold that thought?
Okay. I was really surprised tonight by the community's feedback. I mean, I guess this is kind of a complex topic, and I looked over the title again, and it is pretty nondescript. It doesn't really say it's going to make it easier to. It's going to loosen the build-to line requirement. I think a lot of people heard about it was going to be tightening it, so that's kind of a dramatic 180 that I'm surprised by. So I think getting some community feedback would be good. Maybe email around postcards. I don't know what it takes, but I think using that time to really understand the property owners, stakeholders, some of the stakeholders' feedback on this would be really good for us when we kind of consider this topic again on our next round. So I'm going to support the motion to continue this topic.
Commissioner Rosenblum.
Yeah, I think I'll only need 30 seconds. I'm in full agreement. I'm really intrigued by any proposal that simplifies. I think that potentially the motion that Vice Chair Keller proposed just simplifies things that are aligned with businesses' economic interests and do the thing that is trying to be accomplished. But I'm also very suspicious of it. I think there's probably tons of reasons why build-to lines have been adopted despite clear economic interests for many property owners to do what we would say is, quote, the right thing. I'm very suspicious that there are tooth gaps that appear for other reasons than just parking. So I want time on this one. But anything that simplifies, I'm very welcome. So I'm inclined towards it, but would like to have staff come back with their expertise and public comments. That's it. So I'm fully in line with this.
I think the commission comments of Commissioner King.
Thank you. So I've got a question for staff. So with this no parking in front, so I can picture things like the Cabana Hotel has acres of parking out in front. And so what now that my understanding would be that wouldn't be allowed now or under this change to the ordinance. Can you explain, like, on a scale of 1 to 10, oh, this is a huge change and will wholly impact what would be built versus no, it's really what we're trying to do anyhow, and so it's not a earth-shaking change?
The first thought I have is, when you say no parking in front of the building on El Camino Real, well, the building could be a parking garage. We have a number of projects that, it's tough to park on a small lot. And so they're parking in a garage that's at the front of the, meeting the build-to line. And that's the building you're getting. By saying no parking in front of the building, we still have a parking garage. And so that's neither here nor there, but just to know that by saying it this way, you might get the parking in front of the main building in a parking garage, or as part of the building.
I think we will take the time that it looks like the commission's going to give us to think about that question and be prepared to respond. I'm not sure, if we can think of all of the potential impacts of that change right on the spot. I also think the devil's in the details a little bit, exactly how it's crafted, where it lands in the code. There are a lot of, I don't know if there are a lot, there are properties on El Camino that are very small, where the most economical configuration of existing development and new development is a long, skinny building next to a long, skinny parking lot. Now, that parking isn't really in front of the the building, but it comes all the way to the setback. And it's, so we just would need to be careful to preserve that possibility and not draft language in a way that would preclude that configuration, which is pretty common.
And Commissioner Keller, was your intent, you said, was the wording of our motion was that there will be no parking in front of the building? Or was that was your intent? So in this case, was that your intent? So if there was a long skinny building and parking to the side, would that?
The parking to the side is not in front of the building, so. Okay. I'm thinking about basically the occupied space of the building, and so I wouldn't want to have a structured parking in front of the building. That's not good frontage. So that's not, I mean, I've realized there are technical issues that we need to think about, and so that's why I welcome Commissioner Vargas' suggestion that this come before us and be considered, and I welcome the opportunity for staff to look at the implications of this simplification.
Okay, and last I'd ask the staff. So another way we could go about it is say, okay, we could adopt Commissioner Miller's motion and say, and knowing that you're now going to look at it and take it to council with that additional information. It leaves us out of the loop, but it's more expedient for you to move the thing along. Any comments or preferences there?
I mean, I think, we're happy to come back with the commission with some additional analysis based on your questions this evening. We'll do that as efficiently as we can.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're ready for a vote. All in favor of the substitute motion?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. 7-0. Let's take a 5-minute break, and then we'll come back and consider a further discussion of the Commission's priorities and processes. Always dangerous. So let me just kind of set some context-based guidelines. And that is that on July 9th, we had a meeting on the same topic of our priorities as the Planning Commission, Planning Transportation Commission, and kind of how we might go about that, basically our effectiveness processes. And there was pretty lively discussion. And there was a lot of ideas and suggestions. And although we take the verbatim minutes of our meetings, I want to acknowledge a contribution by Commissioner Rosenblum, who was taking his own notes of our discussion. And he assisted me by giving me a copy of his drawn notes. And in very business-like fashion, he asked a question if there were any action items that might follow from the discussion we had last week. So I asked that we have an agenda tonight, continuation of an important topic of priorities and effectiveness. And let me set some kind of framework, and that is that I believe that Palo Alto has a pretty significant interest in good planning. I think that this interest is reflected in some of the debate and issues in the election that's coming up. I think it's reflected in the Art Palo Alto engagement with the public about the updated comprehensive plan. And I believe that the Planning Commission is a resource in this effort, which should be carefully optimized to fulfill our duties. And I think that just for me, there's just a few big categories that are part of this importance of planning. One is there are very significant concerns about long-range transportation challenges, and I would lump in this category traffic congestion, parking deficit, neighborhood parking intrusion, TDM, TMA, transit, shuttle service, Caltrain, etc. There's the next big category is housing, growth, density, mixed use or not, BTOD, size of units, affordability, height restrictions, and then other issues. Another question came up in our discussion is, what about retail? Is the nature of retail changing? How do we zone for that? What's the community need for services? Are they shopping online, or do they want to go go to stores. Another big category is more process-oriented, and that's how do we improve our use of data and analysis of these important planning issues. And some of the ways this comes before us recently and anticipated in the future is the traffic model, parking studies, noting demographic trends, economic and cost-benefit analysis, pro forma disclosure by developers relating to applications. Another is, and we think we saw this evening, and it was very gratifying, although everybody's left, is how do we engage with the public? I think this is important. I think it's great when it happens. When it doesn't, it can be lonely up here. But a lot of suggestions came out last meeting on this topic about maybe we could make better use of planning-related visuals. Maybe we could be more proactive about early dissemination of meeting materials, online public participation in some form, use of infographics, and so on. And then there are a number of major topics that we might want to be proactive to see, work with staff collaboratively that make sure these surface on our agenda. Clearly the completion of the comp plan update, whether to undertake specific plans, the downtown development cap, PC zoning reform, which we'll get in August, bicycle pedestrian planning, and many other topics which are of great importance. So the question is, as we recognize the importance of planning in the community and kind of our responsibilities as a commission, advisory to council, how can we work in a way that improves our sense of city? Because there's a lot to do, and we're not part of the solution, we're part of the problem. What I would think is that we would benefit from structuring our efforts in a way that would really encourage the use of, encourage thought leadership from the commission. And I would, this has been utilized occasionally at the commission level and sometimes to great good effect. But I would like to encourage people to think about working on colleagues' memos. If there's something where we are thinking about something, then we want to put together some material and some data and some analysis. A colleagues' memo is a good way to do this. If so, I think what we should do is sort of an understanding that this could be something that one or two commissioners could work on, with the notion that they would be able to consult with the then chair of the commission for feedback, and coaching and encouragement and other sort of support. But if there are three commissioners working on a colleagues memo, because the Brennan Act, you have to do it in stealth mode. And I don't think that's useful for anybody. So I think colleagues memos, two people, useful tool should be considered. Then I think that if we would, and possible collaboration with staff, always important, want to think about once we have something, one of these big topics that we're trying to advance the understanding, how do we engage with the public? And one suggestion that Commissioner Rosenblum had from his past life at Google is you can use tools like Google Moderator pretty easily to have a virtual meeting with a very large population of concerned employees, in the case of Google, or residents, in the case of Palo Alto, with an agenda. People can pose questions, there can be responses to the questions, there can be sort of up and down voting relative to the issues noted on the agenda. And in a Brown Act compliant way, the Commission could run one of these, open up Google Moderator for a fixed period of time, 5 days, close it off, have the Commission sort of have access to this whole body of material, and then we sort of lead that into a Brown Act compliant public meeting. And we will let the public engage who might not be able to come to our meeting. It certainly doesn't preclude that, but if people, want to engage with us, and this is a way for them to engage and for us to get their input, this would be, it doesn't cost anything, it's public domain, and it works. Associated with that is that once we have the effort at defining an issue, thought leadership, engaging with the public more effectively in this or other ways. We have recently sort of moved away from having the ad hoc or standing subcommittees. And one of the suggestions is that, as a full commission, this is good, but sometimes it's helpful to delegate and have some of the preliminary work done in advance so that the full commission can be more effective. And I would think that there's a couple areas where we might consider a subcommittee effort useful, and this would probably involve probably 3 commissioners, so that if one were out of town or unable to participate, the meeting could still kind of move ahead. With or without staff support, because there's an issue of resource constraint. But I would think that, I would just propose that because the update of the comp plan is so important and it's not done yet, I think a committee, the subcommittee on that would be worth considering. Another is below the level of the comp plan, I think there's a lot of curiosity and recommendations that Palo Alto start to consider neighborhood or district specific plans. And this is clearly a planning activity, and maybe we should start kind of on a subcommittee basis to think about that. And then I think that we're the Planning and Transportation Commission, and I think something about transportation solutions fairly broadly is something that as a subcommittee could be quite useful to us as a full commission. So let me just stop here and maybe just let Commissioner Rosenblum kind of kick us off, because you helped initiate my thinking on this.
Yeah, I think that you stated it pretty well, which is Sure. Okay, yeah, I won't take that much out. But the idea is there's a couple of topics that are the crux of almost every issue, and those topics are around anything. What kind of city are we? So how dense should we be? What are the impacts to traffic, and what are the methods of alleviating that? So that's generally around the issue of parking management, TDM, TMA, and other related issues. So there's a number of core issues, and I think it would be good to have a group really focus and try to produce something. I keep going back to something that Vice Chair Keller keeps saying, we should be deliberate and data-driven in our decisions, but often each of us are kind of reacting in our own offices to information that we received the week before and doing our own analysis. It would be helpful to have a couple of commissioners really focus and try to produce well thought out memos on these things. That could then become the basis for public meetings. So well thought out, commissioner driven work that could be open to the public in a novel way. So I think these 3 kind of pieces are kind of tied together. And then finally the subcommittee portion is also related to this topic of having some subgroups of us become more expert in these areas and drive them forward. But you can take any of these as standalones. It doesn't have to be a package, but it so happens that I think the combination of these things can be very powerful. So the process would be choose the assignments, so choose the topics that we think are the most valuable, choose a group of 2 to sit down and represent the commission, distribute our findings that the broad commission in a Brown Act compliant way would get to weigh in on. Hold a session that would be open to the public, maybe through a novel way. They can vote in through something like Google Moderator prior to the meeting. And if we want to talk about how that could happen, this is how many Google meetings are run, for example. I've been through this process many, many times, and it might be hard to envision how that happens. But essentially, the larger topic is opened. People ask questions. People vote questions up and down. Discussions happen within the context of those questions. Some get resolved, and before the meeting ever takes place. But at the live meeting, you have a ranked list of what everyone thinks are the most important questions of the day, with some context and discussion that already took place. And the group discusses those questions one by one and tries to come to a resolution on those concerns. That's how that thing would work. But the basis of those sessions would be the colleagues' memo. The colleagues' memo would serve as the topic. And so an example of that would be, in parking/TDM, TMA, there's a number of positions that have been taken by various members of the public, seen various staff reports. Staff is clearly working on this quite aggressively, and so I would assume that it would be the 2 people chosen from this body with the staff member that has been driving this forward and coming up with, the Plan and Transportation Commission sub-working group believe the following, X, Y, and Z would be a sensible policy. There'd be a meeting just on that would be preceded by, a week of a Google moderator discussion before the meeting takes place. That's essentially the idea. Is that?
Okay. I got the sense that the notes that Commissioner Rosenblum took from our prior session really tried to capture all that everybody said. A lot of these ideas that you all had were actually quite good ideas. So is there anybody who wants to just continue the discussion or give some feedback as to whether this notion of sort of focusing our energies to thought leadership and public engagement and subcommittee work is the right next step?
Chair Michael, could I offer some thoughts? I mean, first I included in your packet a copy of the advance calendar, and maybe with your indulgence I could indicate where there have been changes and additions since the packet went out.
Okay.
You have a lot of work on your docket for the rest of the fall. At the next meeting, and I point out, this was a meeting that had basically one item, and it's after 8 o'clock. So your items aren't lightweight. These are things that take a while. So at your next meeting, you have the PC reform study session, which I apologize we did not get to you in time for tonight's meeting, and then a tentative map, which I think will take some time, just because you don't see very many of those, and there'll be some discussion of that. Then on August 27th, we're scheduled to bring to you the shuttle program and discuss with you what the options are for expanding the program. Then in September, I think that's when we're going to bring back to you the item you talked about tonight, the Build 2 line. And then you also have on September 10th your review of the housing element and a recommendation to council. And we've been talking about bringing you an update on the RPP, the residential permit parking issue, which is, it's a meaty issue. And then either at that meeting or the subsequent meeting, it would be the perfect timing for an update on the downtown CAP. If you remember, the downtown CAP study includes 4 studies. 2 of them have been prepared and disseminated. There's still 2 remaining, and they're the biggies. There's the one that is hoping to get to the issue of employment densities, number of employees per square foot, and there's the one about future development projections. That'll be a big item when it happens sometime in September. I don't know whether it'll be the first or second meeting. September 24th, I apologize, your first meeting on the housing elements, just review. Your second meeting is your recommendation to council. Then the chair and I talked about October 8th potentially being the date at which the commission would review the chair's draft annual report to council, so that you could get it finalized and discussed and finalized prior to the joint meeting on October 20th. Then we think that October 8th is the right date for a study session on transportation demand management. We're bringing a contract to council on August 11th for the contractor to initiate their work, so early October would be perfect. They'll be on board, they'll be up to speed.
That's the October 8th session.
That's right. Then October 20th, you have that joint session with council, and then we've talked about October 29th being the date for an update on the bicycle boulevards, and November 12th being the date where you would take action on the recommendation related to RPP. So if I can just, make an observation, I think you're very busy, we're very busy. And I'd love to do try and squeeze in a trial of maybe Google Moderator, something new here, but I'm a little anxious about trying to support a lot of subcommittees or a lot of additional agenda items that derive from colleagues' memos. I also think that in terms of the colleagues' memos, that the commission might want to use that October 20th session with the council to talk about what their expectations are for you to take on, issue-specific analyses and recommendations that aren't related to these projects that are coming your way in the normal course of your business. It just might be a good way to use that that session with them for embarking on additional research topics. So I put there, I don't want to dampen the enthusiasm. I think it's great to think of this commission as thought leaders. I think we're bringing you a lot of agenda items that are going to let you do just that. And if we maybe experiment with ways to get additional input and discussion going in advance of the meeting, that maybe we would achieve, or start to work on achieving some of these objectives.
So I think that was really helpful, if I can just kind of respond a little bit. Part of my concern is more long-term, and I think that having a better understanding about sort of the effectiveness of the commission sort of on a long-term basis is really the goal. And it isn't necessarily that we would immediately assign teams to start drafting issues on a list of hot topics. There may be times when there are no hot topics worth the commission effort in that way. And I think that so I think that the idea of having a subcommittee available, sometimes things like tonight, the proposal about the cleaning up on the built requirement, I would imagine had there been a subcommittee process available, you might have gotten a result tonight that would have helped inform the discussion of the full commission, and maybe we'd be done with it. Maybe I'm mistaken on that, but I think that it's just it's a way to get more. There was a whole organization term on this, but it's sort of subject matter expertise, continually sort of building up and developed on the part of commissioners and teamwork within the commission, and so it's not that we're going to go crazy in the next 4 months. In fact, we may do nothing in the next 4 months other than work on all these things that are on our agenda. This is, I think, our interaction as a whole, and me with you on this is, I think, we're very constructive in making sure that this is a good agenda, and it's true to what the council wants, and we're doing our job. But I'd really like to have some understanding that when there are important planning issues, and there seem to be many, that come up, where you get people assigned, appointed to work on the commission for 4-year terms, who work really hard and develop a lot of experience and knowledge of some of these issues, that there's a way to capitalize on that. And I think also this issue of engaging with the public other than kind of our normal way, or in a complementary fashion, allowing for virtual engagement, I think is, because of the nature of who lives in Palo Alto and how they operate, would be a great enhancement. But let's, so you've given us some guidance, and I've kind of set this ball in motion. Commissioner Alczyk.
First I just want to suggest that this Google moderator concept is profound. It's like a Quora
yeah,
for local government. I mean, this could be $1 billion dinner. I think that's really interesting. I think it's worth potentially meeting with Director Gittleman offline, so the two of you could potentially put together a pitch to our city manager as to whether or not this should be implemented. And I would suggest an approach that, like a little incubator. They can treat the Planning Commission as an incubator for this concept of community engagement. I mean, it's profound. And chances are it's actually not as complicated to execute as it sounds. Frankly, because you just have to put it out there, maybe. I don't know. But I think it's worth exploring. And I think getting sort of top-down buy-in might help funnel resources towards it, because, I mean, frankly, I can't imagine that not being the first of its kind in this country. And, I mean, a very profound, remarkable legacy could be created if there was a system in place for people to vote up community member questions so as to sort of suggest, yeah, there's a lot of us interested in the answer to this question, and not very many of us interested in this crazy question by such and such crazy person. But this guy's, you know, I mean, I imagine in this meeting tonight, that sort of interaction where maybe the language could have got amended pre-meeting so that people were satisfied, or we came in here and said, you just want to address some concerns that there seems to be, you know, anyways, I think it's profound. I honestly can't imagine now that I've heard it moving forward without exploring it more. I felt really lucky when Aaron and George joined us, and I felt really lucky when Director Gilman joined our planning staff. Since then, Aaron has left, and now Stephen is leaving. And I think we need to be mindful that a huge resource in our future planning has departed. You know, when you were talking about subcommittees, I thought, wow, I can't imagine having a subcommittee on the comprehensive plan without Stephen Turner in the room. I think we should be mindful of the workload. I think that's what you're saying. So I think the other thing I want to mention is, you know, we wrote a colleague memo on PCs. I am wishfully hoping that that colleague's memo gets disseminated with the PC material. I hope everybody on the commission reads it, because we did sort of get together as a group to make a thoughtful piece about this idea. And I think, gosh, you know, what a great opportunity for us to have a real meaningful discussion about planning community zones. I mean, this is a great example of, well, let's see what we can achieve. And if everybody sort of takes a little more time in preparation for that meeting to prepare themselves for this discussion, I think it could be really profound. So I feel like we're going to get a chance, actually, to have a very meaningful meeting based off of a colleague's memo. And I think that if that meeting impresses, you know, I think that'll be a great example of the value of a colleague's memo. Because if it does encourage us, you know, a very interesting debate, and I think all of us should be witness to the fact that, you know, maybe we should get together, write a colleague's memo, and then a year and a half later we can have a, but, you know, sometime later we can have a discussion about it. I wonder what you think about this idea of before determining what the issues are, pitching it to the city council during our joint meeting and saying, we'd like you, or maybe actually in your pre-meeting to that meeting, pitching it to the chair to suggest
if I can respond to that.
What we should focus on.
When Eric, we met at my house, and when he was knocking on the door, the phone rang, and it was Nancy Shepard. And so she wanted to talk about the transportation element, and we had a positive reinforcement of the draft of the transportation element. And then I suggested that the commission was really trying to fulfill its duty as an advisory body to the council and looking at ways that we can be more effective in fulfilling our duty. And one of the things might include being a little bit more active in terms of thought leadership, and then maybe doing some more focused work if you know, our meeting structure is going to allow that. And she thought that was a pretty good idea. So we mentioned it at the pre-commission with Vice Chair Keller and Director Gittleman, and it was, you know, I was encouraged in my draft of the chair's report and what we've been up to include this as one of the things that we would like to, you know, promote in terms of the relationship with the PTC and the council. Now, what she did say was that there are probably one or more council members who, you know, whose current thinking isn't receptive to this for whatever reason. And she didn't say who they were, and she didn't really say what the thinking was. but it was kind of this notion that because planning is so important, and because a lot of the residents are kind of activated on these issues, positively or negatively, I think council is kind of nervous that they want to sort of have the first, last bite, and all bites at some of these planning issues, so that they don't really take full advantage of the planning commission doing some legwork. So that perhaps what's happening is that the council, their own effectiveness could be more, better use of time so that they focus on the really big issues, the really, the true policies, and then some of the smaller pieces be worked on both by staff and boards and commissions, not just the planning commission. But I think that, I think the work that we did, with you and me and Chair Martinez on our role relative to the PC zoning applications had this big issue that was undefined. So we were trying to clarify that issue. I think that was a very focused and appropriate effort.
I have a follow-up. I wonder if you share the view that this Our Palo Alto effort or process could somehow direct us as well. Like if we should take cues from the conclusions or findings of the Our Palo Alto process as to determining what sort of subcommittee topic. I mean, the topics you've identified are for sure important. I'm just...
Well, let me talk about, so my background is kind of in corporate governance. So, boards of directors of public companies usually have an audit committee and a compensation committee and a nominating governance committee. They have other committees, but those three are required by the listing rules of the stock exchanges. But the committees have clear charters, and so when these committees do their work, it's pretty clear, and there are legal requirements that they fulfill. What I would like to kind of, this is kind of my world, and I think that when the Planning Commission has a subcommittee, the subcommittee should have a specific deliverable. We should know how long it's going to be operating, what should be the result, and when it should be produced. And it shouldn't be vague, and it shouldn't be just really permissive. I think it should be directed at something which is important, and many members, subcommittee members know, how hard they have to work to get that done, and they should do it, and then maybe they'll be finished with that. Then we can bring it to the full commission, bring it to council, and it moves ahead. So it's not it's pretty concrete and pretty pragmatic, is what I mean. And if we can't do it, then we shouldn't have committees that don't have that kind of clarity.
Yeah, just I guess two more clarifying comments and a response. So first, the response. I appreciate the comment about the workload and full agenda. I think that's valid. I don't think we want to add to the workload, and it is a full agenda. But if you go through the agenda, it is very likely that you're going to have a lot of disconnected items that we sit here and we say, oh gosh, the shuttle program sounds great, but where is it in the context of all of our priorities? And isn't that kind of part of the parking thing that we're about to see? And we see bits and pieces of things, and we do spin our wheels a lot, seeing how they connect to other things. And so when we discussed this idea, it was really around all the comments that people made around the table about our priorities and trying to cluster them. Say, okay, there's only a few things actually that we keep coming back to over and over. Parking problems, and some does this demographic issues. So what's happening with the population here? What is the future of Palo Alto given the aging population or given the lack of young people, et cetera? What does that mean? And so there are a few things that, if we had a touchstone, we'd say, oh yes, that colleague memo authored by Commissioner Tanaka and Commissioner Michaels stated the following: we agree with that, therefore this thing seems to be in line with what we had already said, therefore this is a fairly easy decision. So the intention is to make things smoother and not more, it's not a additional lump of work. Ideally, if done correctly, it's more foundational work that we can go back to and say, oh yeah, this is the fact book that we all had some hand in. The second piece is this shouldn't replace staff. So we shouldn't be doing the job of staff. There should be some staff input, but it's more to get us so that staff doesn't waste their time preparing these incredible reports with us not being informed enough to respond to them adequately, and then asking staff to go back and do a second report because maybe we hadn't been as deep as we could have been in the beginning. And so I think there's a few dynamics that make it so that we are creating more work for ourselves, sometimes by not having the adequate grounding in a couple of topics, not all topics, but a few foundational things that we need to come back to again and again. And so the idea is more that. And so the final piece I'll say, and just to answer Commissioner Alchak, who said, for example, the topic tonight, if it was done in a Google Moderator setting, yes. A lot of discussion tonight in the Google Moderator world would have already been discussed and resolved before coming to the meeting, because all the questions of, isn't this taking my property, isn't this, isn't this, would have been discussed with 100 people already answering, and then finally, a definitive answer that gets voted up, and we come in and say, okay, outstanding questions are the following 4 questions, seem to be the most burning questions. The answers presented were the following. And so in that world, a lot of these kinds of discussions before walking in the room have already been resolved or vetted, and walking in what the hot button issues are and what the alternatives are. And I thought, very sensible recommendation that was given would have been something we would have already had some time to probably contemplate. So anyway, in that world, the result that you were just talking about would probably happen. But anyway, so just a couple of clarifications. So the proposal would have been to have a couple of topics that we feel passionate about, assign a couple people, but it's not to add to the workload. Hopefully there are things that we come back to more regularly.
So who hasn't spoken yet?
So since I've joined the commission, even from the very beginning, I've always been a big fan of trying to leverage technology, because we live in probably one of the most high-tech cities in the world, and yet we have a very, I think for a lot of legal reasons, Brown Act and other inertial type reasons, a very low-tech way of getting community input, discussing matters, and it's kind of a shame given how much technology there is available and around, and how well our own citizens are fluent in technology. So I'm a huge fan of using Google Moderator or any other tool. I personally believe that, I've never actually used Google Moderator and seen it, but it sounds like a good tool. But I personally believe whatever tool we use should be a tool that a lot of people use, so that we're not trying to move people to platforms. So maybe it's that, maybe it's Twitter, maybe it's, who knows, but it's something. Something is better than nothing, which is essentially what I think we have now, because I think the law didn't necessarily contemplate these kind of technologies, these kind of new communications technologies. And so, the law is set up such that we have these live face-to-face meetings, and in a sense, by doing that, we make it open. But in reality, it's actually very closed, and it's very skewed towards a very, perhaps an older type of population that has a lot more time on their hands. And I think there's a huge swath of the community that we miss because of just the way we're structurally set up right now. And these meetings also, it's hard to actually, because it's very regimented, and I think it has to be because we're having a large body of people. And of course, I think that's where subcommittees could actually move faster, because it's less formal and there could be more free-flow conversation. So I think that's actually a good thing to do, because I think we could move faster on topics and really to the root of the matter. But I think, and I don't know if there's like a Brown Act law that prevents us doing, but we have this PC reform, which is going to be an incredibly contentious topic. At least I think it will be. Maybe I'm wrong, but I think it's going to be a very contentious one. So, I mean, could we not just agree as a group today and say, let's do it, versus let's talk about it for next year or so, and then finally do it? So I'd like to put that modest proposal on the table that maybe we just go for it and make it happen next meeting. But
I'm sorry to interject. I did have a conversation with the city's information officer earlier today. She's happy to be with us and talk about how to set this up. I think the idea of setting it up for our next meeting might be a little too ambitious, but maybe we could choose something at the meeting after that, or the meeting after that. And maybe a couple of us could get together with Claudia and with our legal counsel and structure a trial. Decide which of these platforms we're going to use, and kind of how we'd structure it, what kind of content will we put out in advance of the meeting, and who would moderate it, and kind of how it would work. And I'd be happy to put that meeting together if Chair Michael and Mr. Rosenblum wanted to participate in a meeting in the next week or so. We could try and put that together and then look out ahead for maybe an item like the shuttle or the TDM study session to use as in lieu of something that's just 2 weeks away.
Okay, Gregor, you.
Yeah, well, okay, so I think that's fine. I mean, I think one reason I recommend the PC reform is because I don't think it takes a lot to get the stuff set up. I mean, and I think to be honest, whatever we use is really what our citizens are using. It's not what we choose. I think for the most part, it's hard to get people onto platforms. So, and this one is a very contentious topic. So this will be a very big catalyst to make something happen, and and also drive action from ourselves as well and from staff, because it's easy to put things off. It's also easy to say, let's just do it next month, next quarter, next year, and probably it never happens, right? So that or the RPP is also a very, very contentious topic. So both of those are really good ones to get started with, because you could put a sleeper on there, like, oh my God, shuttle service. I just don't know how much input we'll get on that.
That's going to be a sleeper. We're talking about where they expend resources.
Okay, I could be wrong. Maybe I'll be corrected on this, but I do think because I like the thought of trying to improve our productivity. I think our time's scarce, council's time's scarce, and I think council could use us best to really help vet ideas better, and getting community input and really trying to do a lot more of the footwork that, so that by the time it hits council, it's much more well vetted and sounded with the community. And I think we are really tying our hands behind our back by limiting the amount of tools we're using or using subcommittees. I think these are really great ways to get higher productivity. So I fully support it. I'm not really that particular as to exactly how we do it or when we do it. Actually, I am particular about when. I think sooner the better. But I'm not really particular which tool, which platform, other than to do something. Yeah, I was actually at this kind of.
I think you're at 5 minutes.
Okay. Wow.
Mr. Gardias.
Yes, so in terms of the subcommittees and or focus groups, right? They would just pretty much act to address certain topic, and then upon providing resolution or recommendation, they would resolve, right? That's how it's set up at a variety of the corporate environments and other bodies. But I thought that I think it's a very useful idea. I support it fully. But before we get to it, I think, or maybe let me just say it a different way. So the first maybe focus group should just focus on on defining how we should structure priorities. The priorities are coming to us from different angles, from the staff, because of the duties that are intercalendar. They are coming to us from the city council, and also we express our priorities at these meetings as well, right? But they are not very structured, and maybe there are some gaps. So maybe just creating some sort of map of the priorities and then showing to us what we should focus first should be a subject of the first focus.
Maybe if I could just respond real quickly to that. I think that, so not on the tentative agenda is the selection of the chair and vice chair of the PTC for the next 12 months. And I think that one of the roles of the chair and vice chair in collaboration with the director is to really make sure that we collect the priorities of the commission and focus them on the tentative agenda, which can be discussed on an ongoing basis. So hopefully you have that subcommittee kind of in effect with whatever the current leadership is. But that's just a thought. So why don't we continue?
Right. Okay. So this is useful very much. Thank you very much for this comment. Right. But still, it would just So maybe this should be the focus team or group should be in the hands of the chair and vice chair, just to pretty much show us the roadmap for the future, right? Just to give us the full perspective for the next year or two, right? That would be probably the priority. And then once we have this basis, we can just start creating the focus group that would be addressing certain topic, right? But just to make sure that this is not random, not ad hoc, but pretty much just follows certain rhythm.
Okay. And did you have anything else that you wanted to say?
No, I just wanted to make sure that this is pretty much it's structured in some way, right? As opposed to just addressing certain attractive topics that may be just coming up, right?
Well, I think just to capture that really quickly is I think that one of the things I've tried to do with Director Gilman as we've established our working relationship is to really pay attention to that. At least my understanding is that populating the tentative agenda listing and then maybe putting on our agenda this question of priorities is a complementary way of trying to address that. But if we can do that better, we're mindful of this is important.
May I ask you a question, Chair?
Yeah.
With respect to the subcommittees, how do we overcome at least my perceived challenge that the product of a committee could be very susceptible. It's the end product of a committee could be very different depending on the committee's membership. And I'm acknowledging that there's some significantly opposing views on this commission on a number of issues. So I'm not sure putting two opposing views on a committee is a good idea either. I'm just asking how we deal with that.
Well, so I'm impressed the council does a good job of appointing the best qualified applicants when vacancies occur. I'm also impressed that the commissioners who serve on the planning commission do a lot of work, and they're very diligent, and it's a pretty good group. So I'm not worried that we've got a lot of weak spots, and I don't think that we have a lot of people who are representing surprising or extreme points of view, even though there's a lot of ideas that are that may clash before we get to a result. But I think that in the whatever the ongoing leadership of the commission, the chair, the vice chair, things don't. It's not. This is not a benevolent despotism. A lot of things are sort of. So why don't we do this? And to get sort of feedback from the group, and then with the feedback and this feedback, a decision is made by the chair, and we can. I think we also, if we have committees, subcommittees of 3 people, that pretty much mitigates the risk of having a faction or a minority viewpoint or something that isn't going to be useful. And if we have a clear charter or deliverable for the subcommittee, and what they come up with is not useful, we'll say thank you very much, you're done. It's now to the full commission, and that's that. So I don't think it's a big risk. It's a good question, but I think it's a huge risk.
Are you considering the committees being assignments or volunteers?
Assignment. Yeah, it would be a clear, open, transparent, and accountable. With the charter, with the, it would have some responsibility associated with accepting this assignment. Hillary, you're.
Yeah, I guess I think there's a time and a place for subcommittees and there are topics where that makes sense. I think the subcommittees on the comp plan did great work and moved that project forward. I think maybe there will be another opportunity for subcommittee work on the comprehensive plan, or the chair mentioned the idea of neighborhood-specific plans that might follow the comp plan. I'm just selfishly concerned that right now I do not have the staff resources to support subcommittee work by this commission. And I know you're saying, well, you could do it on your own, but, you know, subcommittees of the commission lead to work by the staff. They lead to agenda items and responses and review of recommendations. And I would love to be able to accommodate you. As I say, I think there are topics and there will be a time where we will be able to do that. But I'm just really, I don't want to say, oh yeah, sure, we can handle it, and then we end up not being able to support you.
We're changing the tape.
So did you want to finish that, or?
Yeah, that's a good, really good
Well, before we get to Commissioner King and Vice Chair Keller, who I think would be next, I'm somewhat of a neophyte public hearing. My initial, baptism by fire was the IBRIC. And the IBRIC kind of noted Commissioner Tanaka adventure. There were like 300 meetings in 18 months, including all the subcommittee meetings. And we didn't have staff at those meetings. We had, once a month we met as a full 17-person body, and we had half the city staff was there. But then to actually get work done, we separated into working groups of 6 commissioners, and they went off and worked. And they were responsible in terms of the liaison with staff. Sometimes staff would come and part of all the meetings, but it was in no way a requirement. And then the subcommittees actually came back to the full commission when staff was there and said, well, this is what we looked at, and this is what we thought, and this is our contribution to forward progress. And there was 18 months, and there was 300 meetings, and there wasn't much burden on staff as far as subject. So your world is a lot of adult supervision. Our world is a lot of enthusiasm. And I think that we can combine those. And a lot of
work to do for all of us.
Yeah, but I think, so I would say that if we, as a group get motivated to actually do something along these lines, we would not actually do it without your seal of approval on the decision. Okay, Commissioner King?
Okay, I'll try to be real brief. One, very excited about Commissioner Rosenblum's idea. I think that's just some gaping mismatch between what can happen given our technology-based community and what is happening. So I think that'd be great. Regarding the use of it for the PC reform, I think the PC reform is a study session. So I would not preclude that that's going to bring people who are interested in the topic that won't hear about it until it gets in the papers. People will get very interested at that point. And so if there's some way to then plug that in after that initial meeting as the process for PC reform is moving forward, I think that would be a great opportunity, and one in which probably the community, as much as anything, the overall community is quite interested, I believe, but your methodology might determine that. Let's see, I would say, last time we had this discussion, last meeting, I had said that the materials presented at the meetings was not being added so the public could see it after the meetings, and I was wrong. That in May they started, Rob and I believe started adding that. So now if you go to the website and look at the agendas after the meeting, there will be a separate item, selectable item that then provides the PowerPoints and things that we're seeing at the meeting. Still not as ideal as having it before the meeting so that the people at home can follow along, but definitely an improvement in the right direction. The other thing I would like to see, and have had resistance to that this tentative agenda, I think that should, I just don't understand why that wouldn't be a public document. The answer I've been given is, well, but those things change and people will get mad if they change. Well, you just make that clear that, hey, this is subject to change, just as our agendas up to the meeting time. And so I don't understand why we don't allow that, the use of that, so that people can be clued in early as to when a topic in which they're interested is going to come before the commission.
I think these are public documents, but I think staff has resisted going out much further than this. This is like a 5 or 6 month look ahead. It's harder to get more than that.
Oh, yeah, if this were there, I'd be a happy man. You're saying it's
I mean,
located where?
I don't know
It's the
how
back
we
of the current.
how we actively disseminate it, but I can find out. It's certainly not anything we wouldn't share. I mean, this is a public.
Well, when I first came on the commission, I said, why don't we share that? I was told it changes too much.
Oh,
so.
I can look into that.
Okay. And then lastly, regarding the issue of, I guess, subcommittees and such working, and particularly relative to, for instance, the item tonight where the community had such a different impression of what was being presented to them than did staff, and we were kind of along for the ride. I'm not sure whether you can do it without sucking up more resources, but if there's some way that you can use either the commission or members of the public as a sort of a test run, focus group, something, whatever you want to call it, where they see, because when it's just like any product that anybody's developing, you see it one way, but your target audience, they see it a completely different way until you actually observe them seeing it. And so this would have been a perfect example where maybe if one of us had seen it in advance and said, I don't think this is really getting the point across that we're loosening this. I think the red flag for many of the members who showed up was the Grand Boulevard initiative, and that's anathema to a certain segment of the certain property owners. And so if there's some way that you can incorporate that into the process, I know that it can delay things and makes it harder, can push things out because you're having to go through an extra step, but I think it might make for more effective moving the process forward overall.
Can I respond? Yeah. I mean, I appreciate those comments. I'm hoping that tonight's experience was a little unusual, and I hope you would agree with that. It's because of the history of this ordinance, the fact that it was so controversial last time, and the people who came tonight have a visceral memory of that discussion. And then it's complicated. This build to one thing, as we all recognized in the discussion, is complicated. So, I hope that's not. We don't often find that where people who show up in the room have a diametrically opposed version of what we're talking about than we do. So, I hope that was a one-off.
Agreed. Although I would say there are, as with any product, you don't. Yeah. So I think there's value there. This was an extreme example where there was a complete mismatch. But there are oftentimes where, and particularly if I don't get the report until 2 days before, it's like, wait, I'm really missing things that would help help me understand what we're trying to do here. Particularly when you're basically presenting to a lay audience. You've got people who are by profession urban planners or planners, and you're presenting it to a lay audience, including commissioners and the public. That's it, thanks.
So before we move to Vice Chair Keller, we've got one speaker from the public. Mr. Weiss, would you like to go to the microphone and share your thoughts for up to 3 minutes?
2 minutes. Regarding what you were saying a little bit about colleagues' memos, and I call them white papers, I was reminded of one that I believe was written by Martinez, Michael, and Keller on public benefits apropos of the planned community zoning discussion. And I remember reading this very avidly, having quibbles with certain points and wondering about other points, and actually, never getting around to, I wanted to discuss it with the commissioners if I had the chance or something like that. And I'm wondering about, it's perhaps contrary to some of the suggestions, and also that you made reference to other colleagues' memos that I haven't read yet, but have been referenced. I even wonder about publishing a little pamphlet of recent utterances and articulations of concepts and philosophies. The memo that Michael Martinez and Keller wrote, quoted from law journals from the 70s, the history of zoning, Chicago, Harvard, New York, and it really contextualized the time and place of here in Palo Alto. And I'm just wondering, just as the History Association publishes chapbooks about the history of the parks and enumerates them and the history of street names and stuff, maybe a similar production value that, I mean, they sell those, but maybe we could give them away and have people a chance to read more deeply on some of the ideas that you commissioners, on your own time, research and articulate and debate. And I'm just wondering, that might be a useful outreach project or a way to engage people in these types of debates. I think the quality of the discourse sometimes suffers. I'm not a fan of expediency. I'm a fan of thoroughness and thinking broadly about issues.
And just for clarification, Commissioner Alchuk was also...
It's the same memo.
Okay.
The one we referred to earlier is the same memo.
Okay.
You didn't miss one.
Okay. Vice Chair Keller.
Thank you. So let me first say that there is a high-level consideration of three kinds of things that we might consider. There is the reactive, the proactive, and the integrative. Integrative. So the typical agenda item on this commission is reactive. We're typically reacting to a development, or we may be reacting to some trend that is going on and the council brings to us and whatever. But typically there hasn't been much proactive. And for a variety of reasons we haven't done that, and we also have not done as much integrative work other than the comp plan. It seems to me that colleagues' memos deal with the proactive issue and committees deal with the integrative issue. So a committee allows an integrated look at a topic and all the issues that together comprise that topic and allow for that comprehensive view of that, not to be confused with the comprehensive plan. And in colleagues' memos, so the committees are integrative and they're top-down, they're appointed by the chair. In contrast, the proactive work is bottom-up, and a colleague or two put together a memo based on a topic that they think needs to be considered in consultation with staff and the chair. So that's a bottom-up process that's proactive. So that makes sense. And there's a PC ordinance colleagues memo. There are also two colleagues memos that I was participating in and never saw the light of day. One of those related to housing, and one of those related to transportation, and for some reason they never happened, and I'm not going to go into the reasons. So it'd be better to have a clear understanding of what the policies are with respect to that. Now, a couple of detailed things. Firstly, in terms of the PC colleagues memo, we're not dealing with this de novo on August 13th. We had a meeting on this, and although some of the commissioners on that there was some turnover on the commission since that meeting, those minutes should be attached to the report. In addition, there should be at the meeting a straw poll of what issues we want further studied. And then that issue of straw polls and additional things that from that, or maybe some process, can go to the idea of using Google Moderator on the results of that meeting, not before the meeting, but as we analyze issues, that feeds into the stuff that provides context for a Google Moderator session. So I think that essentially that's a way to handle Google Moderator rather than trying to squeeze it into happening before this process. The next issue is that the comp plan update had subcommittees before that. According to the city code, enacted by ordinance by initiative in 1962, it is the Planning Commission's job to write the comp plan. Not the council, not staff, and therefore what essentially happens is that a subcommittee of the commission can be working with staff as the comp plan is produced, as it evolves into the completed process, to allow for the commission to have involvement in that process, and that should be in some sense representative. It would be nice, but we probably don't have time to deal with the refining our three non-business as usual alternatives through this Google Moderator process. But a good thing to do of the Google Moderator process is choosing among the four alternatives. And maybe when the four alternatives are put together, the business as usual and the other four alternatives, we can set up a Google Moderator process where at that point in time, in parallel with the EIR and then beyond the EIR, we can get input from the public weighing in on these alternatives. And I think that would be an excellent use of Google Moderator.
Remind me, what's your business as usual?
Do nothing.
That's, the business as usual is the default do nothing.
That's too late.
It's basically the base comp plan, the base EIR, which means the continued policies as they are today. I'd also like to consider that there's a difference in the Google moderator between staff input and PTC input. We, as commissioners, cannot weigh in on the Google moderator because it would be a Brown Act violation. But there's nothing to prevent staff from weighing in and responding to feedback and providing comments. Okay?
Staff resources.
Yes, I understand, but no legal prohibition.
That's correct.
That's correct. Okay, thank you.
And you could also weigh in at the meeting.
We can weigh in on the meeting, that's correct.
To the Google moderator issues.
Exactly, those will come to us, that's input to our process, and we can then respond to that at the meeting, correct. And in particular, in terms of the Google, in terms of the idea of districts or whatever, we're certainly ripe for South El Camino Real land use study or concept plan or precise plan that looks at the parcel by parcel, understands the depth, understands what kind of thing makes sense in that context. Because some buildings have a narrow, some lots are shallow, and some lots are deep, and some lots are wide, and therefore understanding the context, understanding what's behind them and things like that really is a kind of study that we should do to figure out what really we want for land use there. In terms of data, I entirely agree with Commissioner Rosenblum, but I provide some data to the Commission. To staff, the staff produced my data, but the staff didn't distribute my Word document, which was a summary of some other data I had. So I'd appreciate it if I can send it to you again, and then you can distribute that Word document as well, and then distribute the total document to the council if that's being done. So that's the Word document. I can send that to you again if you lost it. Finally, in terms of things like proactive, if you will, there are things like ordinance changes. For example, I brought up the issue of having a CUP for private schools so that we can impose TDM requirements. There's no way to get that in the system. It's not going to come down from the council because it's too low level, but it's at the right level for us. It requires relatively little staff attention to it. A colleague's memo on that could happen. And also, yes?
Couldn't that kind of topic be raised under future commission items at the end of the agenda, and then we could calendar it for discussion at a commission meeting? That's
true, but I brought it up several times, and I haven't seen it go anywhere. So
you brought it up on the agenda?
I brought it up several times at the end of the meeting where I said we should consider this, and it hasn't gone anywhere. So I'm not sure if there's tracking the things we bring up at the end of the meeting. In addition, I think we need to study, and I'm not sure the extent that the downtown cap is studying this, which is what is ground floor retail? Is the staffing agency that just replaced Waze ground floor retail? Is the Institute for the Future ground floor retail? We need to really understand what really is ground floor retail, especially in the context of downtown, because a lot of things are happening there. And in terms of the complaints about vacant retail, it's kind of interesting. Some situations, the complaints about vacant retail remind me of the child who killed both of his parents and complains he's an orphan. Because there was a developer, not a developer, let me say, there's a property owner who complained in the press that no retail can survive where Rudy's Pub has been there for 5 decades. Well, if you hadn't kicked out Rudy's Pub, it would still be there for another 5 decades, or at least a long period of time. But because you kicked out what exists there, maybe nothing else will survive there. And the same thing happens with Diddums. If Diddums hadn't been kicked out and not allowed to stay there, then we still have Diddums, and we wouldn't worry about how to fill the Institute for the spaces not filled by the Institute for the Future. So I think in some sense, we need to think about these issues, and to the extent that they're thought of in a downtown cap, that's fine. But to the extent that they're not thought of in a downtown cap, there's an opportunity for a bottom-up consideration of these that might feed into the downtown cap study. And so that's what I think about here. Thank you.
So this wasn't set up as an item where we were going to make final decisions and take action. So I think we're probably, this is great progress in terms of our debate and discussion. And I think that the door is probably open if people are thinking about issues that they'd like to reduce to some sort of a tangible form, which might be a colleague's memo. If you want to do that with one of your colleagues and check with the chair as to that that's an activity that's going to commence. Madam Chair, I'll give you feedback on that. We're not going to make any subcommittees tonight. I think perhaps what I would like to do is we're not too far away from, the chair's report to council, which we're going to discuss as a group. And maybe why don't I just formulate some of this in what I think might be the draft of the report to council, because if we decide to conduct our business in a slightly different way, even if it's a better way, we should let our council masters know that this is what they might expect, and maybe ask them to weigh in on clarifying that this is a good initiative. So in the meantime, without any Brown Act violations, if anybody wants to contact me separately, if you have an idea, I'm happy to give you feedback.
And I'd be happy to set up that meeting with Claudia and Cara to talk about the Google Moderator experiment.
Okay, let's do that.
And maybe the CIO, I can't pronounce his name, but you know what I'm talking about. Not just the chief information officer, but the chief chief technology officer. Is that his title? I thought it was chief whatever.
Jonathan, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
You mentioned it wasn't on the agenda. I'm just curious. Is that happening soon?
What's that?
That process, that voting process?
We're going to try to figure out how to do it.
Yes, I think the first step is...
I'm talking about the election of chair.
Oh, that's, it happens at the end of, end of October?
The terms are used to be at the end of July. Now they've been extended to the end of October.
Okay.
So therefore, when the terms are up and a new term starts is typically when we elect a new chair and vice chair.
Okay. So the two commissioners whose term ends at the end of October are Commissioner King and Commissioner Vice Chair Keller. So they certainly may reapply or apply to be reappointed, and there may be other applicants to the council. Good thing, and at that point, I think we should have our election of chair and vice chair.
I thought you said it was on the agenda, and I was like, well.
Yeah, it's sorry. Would be the next.
We got time.
Be the first meeting in November, typically.
Once we're back, we'll have full strength. Should we never not be full strength? So I think we're done. Meeting adjourned at 9:50.
No, not meeting adjourned.
Oh.
I move to approve the minutes of July 9th as amended.
Okay. All in favor?
I second.
I second it.
Thank you.
Okay, any opposed? And director's report?
Given the lateness of the hour, I will just say that the council is expected to discuss the comprehensive plan alternatives that you discussed at your last meeting on Monday. After an hour or so, they're going to continue the discussion until Wednesday, a meeting that is going to be almost solely dedicated to that topic. So I think we'll get a lot of feedback and direction from council next week on the comprehensive plan. In other meetings in August, we're bringing to the council the contract I mentioned for the TDM, the contract for the climate action plan, an item about the College Terrace Center Market, you might be interested in that, the design of the satellite parking facility, and an item on parking garage technologies later in the month. So if any of you are interested in those items, I'd be happy to provide more information. I also was just going to update the commission on the staffing changes, but I'm sure you saw the announcement that went out about Stephen's departure and about the new assistant director that will be joining us at the end of September.
Okay.
So next, some staff turnover.
Very integrated. So in August and September, we should talk about who's going to be the commission representative liaison to council. If who's going to volunteer for that role, or maybe you just have to
a job description.
No, you just have to. You have to attend the council meeting. That portion of the council meeting was
This is for...
Which one in August?
We're trying to get August and September.
Oh, got it.
And the person who's there, if there's a need for the commission to report to council, that person is there.
September.
Okay, Michael, I'll check for September. And who's up for August? Okay. Thank you.
And that person also reports to the commission at the next meeting when this happened, at the council meeting previously.
Yeah. If anybody hasn't done this yet, what I do, and Vice Chair Kelly would do it something, I show up and I check with Director Hillman. Say, I'm here. What's needed? Do you want me to, be prepared to, comment? And sometimes it's just a matter of listening. But by checking with Director Gilman, it's clear what value would be. Okay? Okay, meeting adjourned at 9.